Before the fear begins, hit like and subscribe, don't miss the chills. Tell us where you're watching from, and brace yourself for stories so terrifying, they'll haunt your night. I once hated when I first arrived in this flyover state. I don't hate them or resent them anymore. To me, they are beauty incarnate, a symbol of what this country was before it all went to garden. The grass waves in the wind, just like the many songs written about it. Are they amber waves of grain? I'm not a farmer, I don't know a thing about agriculture, which proved to be an issue when I took the job, since the majority of our residents had some sort of connection to the dirt before they ended up at peaceful acres. But what I do know is, grain or grass or whatever that is out there shouldn't be that color amber, right? Not brownish black, slowly dying before everyone's eyes, just like peaceful acres. It's an awful name, but it was set well before the company bought the place. The XX figured it would turn off locals if they changed it. The company knows local branding. They come in, buy up a failing adult care living facility, throw a very small amount of cash at it, and then do some razzle-dazzle marketing to get new clients. It's been a solid strategy for the company for years, before it all went to garden. A hawk circles in the clear blue sky, which won't be clear for very much longer, and I watch it slowly loop around and around, hunting for a rabbit or something in the long grass below. I can hear the birds cry in my mind, and I close my eyes, savoring the thought. It's pleasant, something in short supply these days. My phone chimes, and I look down at it, still surprised there's cell service. Storm warning alert, seek shelter immediately. I sigh and start to put my phone away but pause to check my messages. No responses. I haven't been able to get through to my family in weeks. No one on either the west or east coast is picking up anymore. Even if they physically still can, I doubt the cellular towers are working out there, not after what happened. But I keep checking anyway. Ain't no storm, I mutter. Startled from my thoughts and grief, I turn to my office door and see Mr. Oakhurst and his wheelchair parked just outside in the hallway. No, Mr. Oakhurst, it's not a storm, I reply and give him a smile. He doesn't buy the smile and frowns at me. Why you still here, Mr. Lance? The octogenarian asks. You don't need to be here anymore. We'll fare all right without you. Go try to find yours. My brother and his family lived in Baltimore. My sister and her family lived in Seattle. The look on his face tells me he understands the gravity of what I'm saying. Oh, that's right, he says and nods. I forgot. Sorry to bring it up. It's all right, Mr. Oakhurst, I say and widen my pained smile. I appreciate you thinking of me. It's a kindness that's rare these days. I can only imagine what they must have gone through. He waits there in the hallway. Do you need something? I ask. Come on in and talk if you have something on your mind. No, not trying to be a bother, he says. But. A but like that wouldn't have bothered me a couple of months ago. Now, it can mean all sorts of awful stuff. Glenda's cut rations again, he says, as if it's no big deal. And while I ain't what I used to be back when I had my farm, I still got to have at least enough to somewhat fill my belly. Yeah, Mr. Oakhurst, I understand, I say and sigh. I sit down at my desk. But we're running low on everything. I'm trying to make it last until we can get some more supplies. So, you're the one who told her to cut the rations? I did, I say and nod. Blame me, not Glenda. I ain't blaming no one, he says and waves a hand at me. Just wanted to make sure that old garden ain't hoarding food. Hey now, I say and purse my lips. No need for that, Mr. Oakhurst. We're all trying our best during these awful times. Nah, she was a garden long before you got here, he says, then nods at my office windows. Or before any of that garden happened, either way. I'd appreciate it if you didn't call my staff garden, I say and raise an eyebrow. I don't add, because there is barely any staff left, but I think he gets the subtext. Can you do that, please? I ain't making no promises, he says with a laugh as he backs his wheelchair up, turns it to the left, and rolls away, probably headed to the lounge to watch a DVD with the few residents left. There's no live TV, radio, or even streaming anymore. All of those services finally went offline, along with the internet, on the 8th. I'm not asking for promises, I call after him. Just a little kindness. A little kindness, it's what we all need right now. But as far as I've seen, the world is all out of it. I reflexively turn to my computer, ready to go through the dozens of reports. I have to submit reports each week, but there's no way to submit them. No internet means no updates to the spreadsheets, compliance forms, P&L statements, and all that old bureaucracy I used to be so immersed in. And even if there was internet, it's not like there's anyone to send the reports and statements and forms to anymore. New York is gone. 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 Can I still use the computer to keep track of inventory and shift assignments? I can, yeah, but there's really no point. We have so little of both that my spiral pocket notebook works just fine. I pull it out of my shirt pocket, flip it open to the last tally, and grimace. 13 residents, 8 staff members, including myself, 15 days of propane for the generators, another dozen days if I switch to the little diesel we have on hand, and 7 days of rations even at the new, lower levels. I stopped bothering with the pharmacy. The meds we have are distributed into each room that needs them. Some of the residents need the same meds, of course, so their supply is less than the rest. The painkillers and opiates I have locked away in my wall safe, not for my personal use. No, never, but because at some point, either the staff or the residents, someone will realize the pills are an easy way to escape what is happening to all of us. And while I am not against people making their own choices regarding their fate, I'm not ready to go yet, so I don't want to be the last one here among roomfuls of suicides. It's selfish, I get it. It's controlling, for sure, but I'm the administrator of Peaceful Acres, and there are liberties I feel I can take. Hiding the hard drugs is one of those liberties. A knock on my door frame brings my eyes up from the sad news in my pocket notebook. Hey, Melissa, I say as I see our head nurse standing there, our only nurse, if I'm being honest. Like me, Melissa isn't from this area. She came in from Chicago about 2 years before I arrived. Chicago, its fate was just as bad as New York's, from what we've heard. Can we talk? Melissa asks, then steps into my office and shuts the door. I suppose so, I say and gesture at the chair in front of my desk. Have a seat. She does and lets out a long, exhausted sigh as her butt settles into the seat cushion. Mrs. Jansen isn't going to be much longer, she says and looks up at the ceiling. Melissa is a lovely woman, and I wish we'd had more time to get to know each other. I don't condone workplace romances, but this is a very small town, and city folk like her and I are rare around here. How long are we looking at? 2 days, maybe, she states and looks back at me. Her eyes are rimmed with red and sunken from lack of sleep, an affliction we all face, but her gaze is clear and focused. We have to make a decision before then, though. I know, I say. It's been on my mind. She looks at my hand in the pocket notebook I still grip. It can be on your mind all you want or don't want, she says and leans forward, resting her elbows on her knees. But there are only 2 things driving us forward now, numbers and willpower. The latter we can control, the former we can't. And in the end, you can't eat willpower. Tell that to my ex-wife, I say and laugh. Melissa doesn't laugh with me. What did Dr. Burke say when you talked to him? She asks. My eyes flit to the side, avoiding hers, as I put the pocket notebook away. Toby, she snaps. You haven't spoken to him yet. It's not exactly a subject I want to broach, I reply. I'm working up to it. Well, you better hurry, because Glenda cut rations again. I know. Was that your order? Yes. Why? You can't hold off the inevitable. But I can postpone it, I say and sigh. Then I do look into her eyes, and we hold our gaze for several minutes. All right, she says and stands up. I understand. It's a huge choice, but talk to Burke ASAP, will you? If we do go forward, then timing will be everything. I'm sure Glenda can handle it, I say. I trust her. She's from around here. I know she has the skills. That woman is a stone-cold garden, Melissa says, making me flinch at the description. Whether she has the skills or not isn't the issue. Can she do it? Probably. Will she do it? I have no idea. I'll talk to Dr. Burke right away, I say. She walks to my office door and opens it. Promise? She asks as she pauses in the doorway. Promise. I'm holding you to that, she says. Next time I ask, if you haven't spoken to him, then I will. I promise. She studies me for a few seconds, then nods and leaves without another word. I lean back in my chair and sigh. It's my turn to look up at the ceiling. I'm busy counting the dots in a single square of plaster tile when I hear loud running footsteps echoing down the hallway. Mr. Lance, a voice booms, and suddenly the door is filled by the massive bulk of Joshua Garrett. A local, like Glenda, Joshua is as typical a farm boy as it gets around here. While over 6 feet tall and close to his prime, he has to top 300 pounds, although, considering our current issues, that weight has diminished considerably over the last few weeks. What fat and padding he had on him is gone now, leaving only long, ropey muscle and a head of blonde hair. Joshua, what's wrong? I ask as I watch the man try to catch his breath. Outside, he huffs and puffs. Trucks. Guns. He swallows hard and takes a deep breath. Maynard is back. __, I say and then frown and wave my hand at Joshua. Pardon my French. How many trucks? Or men? Or guns? All of it, I say, hoping he took the time to get that information before running to sound the alarm. 4 trucks, 8 men, 6 rifles, 10 pistols, 2 shotguns. Thank you. I say and stand up. Have they approached the building? Not yet, no, he says. They pulled their trucks up to the wire, and all hopped out. They're just standing there. Maynard knows someone will come get me, I say and motion for Joshua to move. He's trying to intimidate us. It's working, Joshua says. I'm intimidated. We all are. But we can't let Maynard know that, I say as I leave my office, turn right, and hurry my ass toward the facility's entrance. I call over my shoulder, go get Roger and Knox. Joshua's hesitation makes me stop. I turn to face him and raise an eyebrow. He tries to look away from me, but he's too nice of a soul, so he finally says, Roger left in the night. He did. Where'd he go? I ask, surprised. I don't know, Joshua replies and shrugs. He didn't leave a note. He was just gone this morning when I went to ask him something. All of his stuff is gone, and his bed was made. Does he have family close by? Not that I know of. Joshua scrunches up his face and looks down at his feet. I guess it was all too much for him. I suppose it was, I say and nod. Then just go get Knox. Ah, holy heck, Joshua. What's wrong with Knox? Is he gone too? No, not really. Not really. I saw him, rubbed my face. How drunk is he? He peed himself again, man. And I had to check his pulse to make sure he was still breathing. He pauses. I think he pooped too. You have got to be kidding me, I say and shake my head. The pain is starting behind my eyes, and I fear another migraine is coming. All right, I'll deal with Maynard all by myself, I guess. You go get Knox sobered up. He's the only one keeping this place running. If we lose our head of maintenance, then we might as well just turn the lights off ourselves. How do I sober him up, Josh? We ain't got no coffee left, and all the uppers in the pharmacy are gone. Therapy room, I say. Fill a nice bath and drop him in it. You're twice that man's size. I'm sure you can carry him to the tub. But he pooped himself, Joshua says, disgusted. Joshua, you are an attendant at a long-term adult care facility, I say and roll my eyes. Poop is a major part of your job with the old folks. Yeah, Joshua argues, but Knox ain't even old enough to be my daddy. I don't want to carry him while he has a full load. Then clean him up first in the shower, I say. That'll help wake him up, and maybe you won't have to dump him in a nice bath. I take a deep breath and walk back to Joshua. He looks down at me with tired, wide eyes. Confusion twinkles out of those huge baby blues, with panic right on its heels. You've got this, I say. Get Knox cleaned up. I'll talk to him after I talk to Maynard and his crew. It'll all be okay. It ain't going to be okay, Mr. LeChance. I can't argue with him on that point, so all I do is pat his shoulder and walk away, headed toward the entrance. The light is bright but has a weird hue to it when I step out of Peaceful Acres' front door and walk toward the barricade of furniture and razor wire we set up between the edge of the parking lot and the front entrance. It's overkill, yes, But I wanted to make sure I didn't wake up in the middle of the night to a truck crashing through our front glass. People have gotten extreme, and I wouldn't put it past anyone to assault a facility like that out of desperation. And desperation is what I see on all the men's faces as I stop on our side of the wire, except for Maynard. I don't see desperation on his face. I see determination, which is terrifying. "Mr. Maynard," I say. "Just Maynard," the thin man replies. He's all angles and knobs, with almost no meat on him at all, the complete opposite of Joshua. "I've told you more than a few times, LaChance. My apologies," I say and mean it. "It's just my upbringing." He doesn't respond. He only stares at me, then he slowly looks past me to the facility. He clucks his tongue a couple of times as his guys look on. "What can I do for you, Maynard?" His eyes return to me, and he smiles. "Times are tough, ain't they?" "You can say that," I reply with a snort. "Tough for all," he says. "Seems a shame that this place should be allowed to hoard resources, don't you think, Maynard?" "I can assure you that we aren't hoarding anything," I respond, my mind instantly bringing up my conversation with Melissa. "We are as strapped for resources as much as everyone else, probably more so, considering some of the special needs the residents have." "Strapped for resources," he says and chuckles under his breath. "What do the mold folks need with those resources? Their time is up. You should be sharing with those of us who might have a chance, not keeping it for a bunch of people who are already knocking on death's door." "My job is to care for the residents of Peaceful Acres," I say. "And I plan on doing that job until the day I can't." "Care for what you wish for, Maynard," I say and give him a wicked grin. "Maybe that day is today. Is that why you are here, Maynard?" I ask and hold out my arms. "Scary things and parade around with your scary guns, so I'll curl up into a terrified ball and let you ransack Peaceful Acres for the few supplies we have left. That's what you came here for? Then I suggest you turn around and leave, because you are about to be disappointed. I still care for these people, and I will make sure that what little time they have left is as comfortable as possible. Letting them starve so you can fuel a pipe dream for survival is not going to happen." "Pipe dream?" he asks and looks puzzled. "What do you mean by that?" He looks over at his armed pals. "Oh, we're going to survive this. We'll survive, and we'll rebuild." He looks back at me. "But in order to do that, we got to have resources. Then you should drive off and start looking for them, because you won't find any here," I say. I pull my pocket notebook out and flip to the latest numbers. "Do you see what we have, Maynard? Do you want to know what little is left?" I shove the notebook toward him, and he takes a step back like it's contaminated. "Some people are like that when faced with the truth." "Days," I say. "We have days. There are no resources left. You can go ahead and get past this barricade, you've got the men and trucks to do it. You can kill us all and take what's left. Again, you've got the men and the guns to do that. But what you take will last your group a day, if that." "We need medicine," one of the men shouts from a truck down the line. "My boy has diabetes. The insulin ran out a while back," I say. "We've lost 6 residents because of that. I'm sorry, but we just don't have what you need, let alone what you want." The men begin shouting in protest. __. He's lying. Just shoot him, Maynard. It's in there, we just need to go get it. Maynard holds up a hand and silences his men. He finally looks at the notebook, then he looks past it to me. "How many days?" I tap the notebook. 7, I say. "If that." He keeps looking at me, then he looks over his shoulder at his men. When he turns around, his eyes are hard, and I can see he's made up his mind. "Talking is over now. We'll be back in 7 days, he says. "Then we'll have a look and see if you're telling the truth. If you are, we'll walk away and let this place die on its own. If you aren't, well, LaChance, let's hope you are telling the truth, because I'm in a hurting mood." "Aren't we all?" I say and refuse to break his gaze. He licks his lips, then turns and walks to the closest truck. 7 days, LaChance, he shouts as he hops into the passenger seat, and another guy hops into the driver's seat, starting the truck up with a gut-rattling roar. I stand and wait for all of the men to load up in their trucks. Most glare at me, but a few I can see aren't as convinced as Maynard at the idea of going after a home for the elderly. Then I see a face I know, Will Hokum. The young man pauses but doesn't look my way. Will, I say. Your grandmother is still alive. You can come in and visit her if you'd like. He still doesn't look my way. Will, let's go, a man in a red pickup a few feet from Will shouts. I'm sure she'd love to see you, Will, I say. She's still a little spitfire. His face angles toward me, and I see just the hint of a smile starting. Then a truck horn wipes that smile away, and Will jogs to the red pickup. When he hops in, he looks at me and nods. I have no idea what that nod means. It could mean anything at this point: thanks for taking care of his grandmother, thanks for acknowledging him, or just a nod of recognition, telling me he heard me. When the last truck is pulled out of the parking lot, I go to the barricade and move the small purple bookshelf that I had strategically placed off to the side. One shove, and I have enough space to crawl through to the other side of the barricade. I make sure I can't hear the truck's horrific mufflers before I walk to the road to the west. All I see is blacktop next to a field of blackening grass. There's a silo far off. I think it's the Crocker farm, but I'm not sure. It's so hard to keep all the farms straight out here. Although, now that the wind has shifted, I suppose I can't call anything a farm anymore. Farms grow stuff. Nothing is going to grow anymore. I turn and face east. More blacktop, although this direction, I can see the tops of the buildings that make up the town: the church steeple, the 3-story bank building, the grain silos of the feed and stock, the courthouse's dome, the water tower, and smoke. I mutter and leave the road, racing across the parking lot, through the gap in the barricade, and inside Peaceful Acres. Joshua. Scott. A fire. Joshua, a trim man in his mid-40s, peeks his head out of the front office that sits just past the reception desk. Hey, boss. What's wrong? Scott asks. He was our physical therapist before it all went to garden. He worked Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, splitting his time between Peaceful Acres here and another facility 2 counties over. Despite having the same problem with the lack of food, he looks spry and energetic as always. Mr. LeChance, Joshua says as he turns a corner and strides toward me. Fire, I say and point east. In town. Something is burning. I'm sure it is, Scott says with an apologetic shrug. A lot has burned around here. He's right. Mr. LeChance, Joshua agrees. I know, I say, but all that stands between us and town are 2 neighborhoods and a whole lot of very dry grass. The wind shifted while I was out talking with Maynard. One spark from that fire, and we'll have flames racing right for us. So, what do you want us to do? Scott asks. He's no longer peeking out of the office but standing right outside the door, his hands on his hips, a frown on his face. We're not firefighters, I say. We're also not idiots. I think we can figure out how to turn a hose on and put out whatever is burning. Chief L didn't leave, Joshua says, nodding his big noggin up and down, making his blonde bangs flop this way and that. I bet he's got it all sorted out. I shake my head. Ellis a good chief, Scott says and steps to the reception desk so he can lean on it. He smiles at me. Let's leave it to the professionals. Peter did leave, I say. He swung by to see his father, then he got into his van with his family and drove off. I thought I told everyone that. They both frown, look at each other, then look at me. Scott shakes his head. You didn't tell me, he says. I don't remember that in our last staff meeting, Joshua says. Well, I'm sorry it slipped my mind, I respond and hold out my hands. But now you see why I'm panicked. If the chief is gone, then I doubt anyone else stuck around. We need to go put out that fire. Scott and Joshua share another look, then Joshua shrugs and heads toward the front door. All right, then, he says and walks out of the building. Where's he going? Scott asks and laughs. We're all parked out back. In half a second, Joshua walks back inside. Cars ain't out there, he says sheepishly, then keeps walking back into the facility. Scott follows right behind, and I'm behind them. A few residents are in the lounge as we pass by, but none look our way. Their attention is on the big flat-screen TV and some Western movie they have playing. I think I catch a glimpse of Clint Eastwood, but I'm not sure. LaChance, a raspy voice barks from the double doors to the kitchen as I hurry by. Glenda. I don't stop because whatever she has to tell me can wait. I know how much food we have, so I know there's no hurry to anything Glenda does. I'm almost to the back door when I hear, "Damn it, LaChance. I'm calling you." I stop and turn around. "What is it, Glenda? Have you talked to Burke yet?" she asks me, her eyes more red-rimmed than any of us. I swear she's huffing cleaning spray or something. "Melissa said you were going to talk to him." "Damn it, Melissa. I wanted to handle this." I study the large woman, and she is large. It makes me wonder if our rations might be in 2 piles. 1 pile for us, 1 pile for Glenda. I haven't had a chance, I say and give her a cautious smile. I glance over my shoulder, but Scott and Joshua are already gone. Hopefully, they're getting a car started up. I've been a little busy today. "Well, I ain't saying I'm going to do it," Glenda says, "but I'll think about it if Burke signs off." "When you going to get him to sign off?" "Later," I say. "There's an emergency right now." "What emergency?" Glenda asks, giving me a disbelieving look. "Ain't nothing left to be making emergencies without there if you ask me." "Thank you for your input, Glenda," I say, "but there's a fire in town. We're going to take a look and hopefully put it out." She laughs. "Why?" "You let Chief L handle it." "Peter isn't here anymore," I say, trying not to get exasperated with the woman. "I got to go, Glenda." "But you'll talk to Burke when you get back, right?" "I'll talk to Burke when I get back, yes." She nods and walks back into the kitchen. Normally, the smell of mashed potatoes, cinnamon buns, and fried chicken would waft out from those double doors, but the joys of those smells aren't around anymore. Now, all I catch is a hint of bleach. I'm hoping to change that when I talk to Burke after I return. Well, hope is a strong word. I'd rather not have the conversation I need to have with the man at all. That's my true hope. But we are where we are. Hurrying outside, I almost step in front of the Jeep that Scott is driving. He gives a honk, and I pause just before leaving the sidewalk, avoiding a hard hit from the Jeep's front bumper. "Careful, LaChance," Joshua says as he opens the passenger door and gets out, lifting his seat up so I can crawl in the back. "Sorry, I don't fit back there." "All good, Joshua," I say and climb in. Once Joshua is settled back in his seat, Scott floors it, and we race around the building and out to the parking lot. Josh has to get out again and move some of the furniture for us to get by, but like I said, he's a big boy and can handle the work. By the time we're on the blacktop and speeding toward town, the smoke has increased considerably. "You weren't kidding," Scott says, avoiding a pothole on our left just to hit a bigger one on our right. I bounce in my seat and hit my head on the roll bar above me. "Sorry," Scott says and gives me a wink in the rearview mirror. Sure would have been nice if they'd fixed the road before the world ended, right? Leave it to Scott to find humor in potholes. When we reach the edge of town, I notice 2 things. All the shop windows have been busted out, and I do mean all of them. Not a single window pane is intact on Main Street. The second thing is the smoke is coming from Sherry's diner. When we get close enough to see the situation, I take a deep breath. The whole building is nothing but bright orange flames and thick black smoke. And sitting in the middle of the road is a man with a shotgun in one hand and a turkey leg in the other. Magnus McClintock. If Maynard is the local garden, then Magnus is the local menace. I've had more than a couple of conversations about the man with Dr. Burke. Apparently, he got kicked by a mule, or hit by a truck, or run over by a tractor, or something like that, when he was a kid. The story differs depending on who tells it. "This isn't good," Joshua says, and I can hear the real fear in his voice. "We can't put out the fire if he's sitting there. He's just one man," Scott says. "If we can't reason with him, we can at least." "You can't reason with Magnus, and we can't overpower him," Joshua says. "You're almost as big as this Jeep," Scott protests. Joshua points out the windshield at the man, who is lazily sitting in the road while he eats a turkey leg. "Magnus ain't right, Scott," Joshua says. "Some people got wires crossed and all, but Magnus, he ain't got no wires left to cross." Scott stares out the windshield. "Is he the one who punched Mr. Zeller's bull to death?" Scott asks. "Is that this guy?" "Yeah," Joshua answers. Took him 3 punches. Well, we can't just let everything burn, Scott says. I tap Joshua on the shoulder. Let me out. Let you out. Why? What for? Joshua argues. I'm going to talk to him, I say. I'd like to try to come to an understanding. Mr. LeChance, you ain't listening, Joshua says. Magnus will tear you apart if he even thinks you're going to ruin his good time. Then I won't ruin his good time, I say and smack Joshua's shoulder. Now, let me out. Please. Joshua hesitates and glances at Scott. Scott shrugs and looks back at me. Are you sure? He asks. Hell no, I say. That's Magnus McClintock. I know the stories. And they ain't stories, Joshua says. They're real. Still, I have to try. If the whole town goes, I say, which would only give us a day to evacuate everyone before the fire spreads this way. This whole county is dried out. One spark, and we'll look like New York. I regret it the second I say it. Sorry, I apologize. Guys, that was in bad taste. Speaking of taste, Scott says, where'd he get that turkey leg from? Sherry hasn't had a scrap of food for weeks. I don't know, but it sure looks good, Joshua says. Maybe you can ask him to share, Mr. LeChance, since you're going out there anyway. I'm not getting between that man and his turkey leg, I say, then smack Joshua's shoulder hard. Move. Please. Oh, okay. He whines and opens the passenger door so he can get out and raise the seat for me. I stumble out into the road and take a deep breath. Magnus's eyes are locked onto the flames as he casually gnaws on the turkey leg. I walk toward him. Magnus, I call out, making sure he knows I'm approaching him well before I get there. I'm sure he's noticed us, he'd have to by now, but you can never be too careful with an unpredictable human like Magnus McClintock. Magnus, are you all right? I ask him as I get closer. Right as rain, he says and keeps eating. Right as rain, I mutter. From what I know about our circumstances, when the rain hits, nothing will be right. Maybe the glitchy storm warning isn't too far off after all. For now, the skies are blue, even if they do have a weird tinge to them, and the tinge is getting worse each day. Something to do with radioactive particulates in the atmosphere messing with how the sunlight is refracted. I tried to pay attention when the broadcasts inundated us with information in those first few days, but I had a facility to run and a lot of residents to calm down. Magnus, I ask, do you know who I am? He stops chewing but doesn't look my way. Then he shrugs. I'm Tobias LeChance, I say. From Peaceful Acres. Do you know what that place is? Old people's home, Magnus says and resumes chewing. He bites off a hunk of turkey meat, and my mouth starts to water. Yes, that's right, I say. And I run the old people's home. Magnus grunts. Well, we have a problem, I say, glancing at the burning diner. We have more than just a single problem, but I'm trying to tackle them one at a time. Those old people I help, well, they're about to run out of food. So, I was wondering if you could tell me where you got that turkey leg. Sure, Magnus says and shrugs again. I wait, but he doesn't continue. Something inside the diner collapses, sending spouts of cinders high up into the air. Woohoo! Magnus says and waves his half-eaten turkey leg in the air. Fireworks. Magnus, I start again. Do you have more turkey? Yeah, he says and bites off another hunk. My stomach growls. Magnus glances over at me and smirks, then he holds out the turkey leg and says, "You want a bite?" It takes all of my self-control not to sprint over to him and eat straight off that bone without even taking the leg in my hand. I don't do that, though. Instead, I say, "No, thank you." But the residents at Peaceful Acres would love some of that turkey. He looks around, then scowls, his eyes locking onto me. "I don't see no old people around here," he says. "No, right. They're back at Peaceful Acres. Then how would they get a bite of this leg?" "Well, I was hoping you had more turkey somewhere." I look over at the burning diner and pray the rest isn't inside. "I got lots more." "You do?" I reply, hope threatening to well up inside me, but I tamp it down. Easier to deal with the disappointment this way when it comes, and these days have proven that disappointment will come. Hundreds. Magnus says and shrugs. In there? I ask, finally broaching the subject. In the diner? Nah. In my freezer at home. Your freezer? Why is your generator in there? How else was I going to start up the fryer? He responds and shakes his head. He gives a little chuckle. Need more turkey? You brought your generator here to run the diner's fryer? I ask, very confused. Well, yeah, he says. Ain't no power no more, so I had to bring my generator. He points at the diner with his turkey leg. It's in a wheelbarrow inside. But that's all that's inside, right? I ask. The turkey isn't in there. Turkey legs, he corrects me. Pardon me, turkey legs, he repeats. I ain't got no turkeys. Just turkey legs. I'm still not getting it, so I switch gears. Why'd you come to the diner? I ask. I look over at the Jeep, and Scott is raising his hands in the universal gesture of what is going on. I wave him off and look back at Magnus. His face is turned, and he's staring at me. You going to listen to my answer or not? Oh, yes, of course. My apologies, I say. Continue. He leans forward and looks past me. I know him. Oh, which one? Joshua or Scott? The little one. He helped my daddy walk again. Big waste of time. Daddy's dead now. I'm sorry to hear that. Why? Pretty much everybody's daddies are dead now, I suppose. He looks up at the sky and sings some phrase to some gospel song that I don't know, then he chuckles and goes back to his turkey leg. After 2 more bites, he says, You asked me something, and now I forgot. I asked you why you came to the diner. Oh, 'cause I was out of oil, and I wanted to fry me some turkey legs, he says, cheerful as can be. So, I loaded my generator into Daddy's old wheelbarrow and walked myself here because I knew Sherry's had a fryer, and that fryer had oil. How many legs did you end up frying? Just the 2, he says and nods at the gutter in front of the burning diner. I see a turkey leg gnawed all the way to the bone sitting on the storm grate. You loaded your generator into a wheelbarrow and walked all the way here so you could use Sherry's fryer for just 2 turkey legs? I was only hungry for 2, he says and strips the rest of the flesh off the turkey leg he's holding. He throws the picked clean bone at the other one, knocking both into the storm drain. Kobe, he yells and pumps his fists in the air. Then he stands up, wipes the butt of his jeans, looks at me, looks at the diner, and says, I should go get the generator so Daddy isn't too mad. Magnus, no. I yell, but either he doesn't hear me or he doesn't care. The man walks straight into the burning building and is lost from sight instantly. What the garden? Scott yells as he jumps from the Jeep. What the actual garden, boss? What did you say to him? I was asking about his generator, I say, my voice weak. He went to go get it. We still need to put this out, Joshua says. We should go to the fire station. I stare at the fire. It doesn't look like any embers have sparked any new fires on the buildings next to the diner, but the heat is bubbling the paint, so combustion is coming soon. Yes, I say finally. Let's go get a truck. When we reach the fire station, there are no trucks. There's barely any equipment at all. What there is are dozens of hoses of various sizes still hanging from the huge hooks on the walls. Grab as many as you can, I say to Joshua and Scott. We can use the hydrant. They nod and help gather up hoses, piling them into the Jeep. On the ride back, I have to sit on a pile of hoses, my head jammed against the Jeep ceiling. Joshua knows enough about irrigation to figure out how to connect the hoses to the fire hydrant across the street from Sherry's. It takes us a while to get the valve to open, but we finally do. We end up whipping around and trying to stay upright as soon as we turn the hoses on. Bloody, bruised, battered, and soaking wet, the 3 of us manage to wet the buildings next to Sherry's, then get most of the flames to die down in the diner itself. It's good timing because, as the burnt-out shell sizzles and steams, the hoses go limp, and the water slowly turns to a trickle. All of our heads turn to the water tower just outside town. No power to pump it up there, Scott says. Will we be okay, Mr. Lance? Joshua asks. Yes, I say. Peaceful Acres is on its own well. Joshua, I say, there's no power to pump it up there. We have to go. I drop my limp hose, letting it clatter to the ground as I race to the Jeep. Come on. Where are we going? Scott yells, right on my heels. When I reach the Jeep and hop into the driver's seat, I see Joshua still standing in the street, his eyes on the last wisp of smoke. Joshua, I shout, and he slowly turns his head. Then he jogs over to us. Are you all right? Yeah, he says as he climbs into the passenger seat. Scott has taken the back seat since I showed no inclination to let him drive. You sure? Scott asks. Yeah, Joshua says quietly and shakes his head. No. I saw Magnus, oh. Scott says, we've all seen a lot of things these past few weeks, but that had to be rough. Hopefully, this is all worth it, I say and floor it. The Jeep speeds out of town, and we head down the blacktop toward the McClintock farm. I don't need directions. Everyone knows where the McClintock farm is, it's the one with the rooster. As we pull into the driveway, I glance at the 20-foot tall metal rooster that sits in the front acreage. Apparently, Magnus's father won it in a poker game and refused to take cash. Instead, he made the loser ship the giant rooster halfway across the country so they could plop it down only 40 yards from the main road. The county protested, but in the end, there was nothing they could do. So, if you wanted to get to or steer clear of the McClintock farm, all you had to do was look for the rooster. I pull us right up in front of Magnus's front porch and hop down. I didn't hear any generator, I say to myself as Joshua and Scott join me. He took it. We might be too late, Scott says and hurries inside the house, followed by Joshua. I'd filled them in on the way. If Magnus had taken the only generator he had to Sherry's, then that meant there was no generator at his farm. I hoped he only took a secondary generator, but from the lack of motor noise, I realized he took his one and only generator, the generator that was powering the freezer. The freezer, he said, had turkey legs in it. Hundreds of them. I dash inside, hunting for the kitchen. I find it, along with a wide-open door. A sad moan is coming from the door, and I peer inside. All I see are the tops of the basement stairs. Are you two down there? I call. Yeah, Scott replies. When I reach them down in the basement, Joshua is staring into a massive chest freezer filled to the top with vacuum-sealed bags. Each bag has a turkey leg in it. They might be okay, Scott says. Nah, Joshua responds, shaking his head. They've been warm too long. Hours now. Can't trust them. Even in the vacuum-sealed bags? Scott asks. I don't know, Joshua replies. Maybe. Let's load as many up as we can carry in the Jeep and take them back to Peaceful Acres, I say. Glenda will know. What about the rest? Scott asks. We'll only be able to bring a quarter of what's here. A quarter is better than none, I say. All of it is better than a quarter, Scott counters. We're wasting time, I reply and point at the freezer. Grab as many as you can. We load up the back of the Jeep and race back to Peaceful Acres. Where in the hell did you get that, LaChance? Glenda asks me as I slap a sealed bag down onto a stainless steel table. I tell her the whole story, including the amount of time we think the freezer has been off. It's risky, she says, but there's only one way to find out. She grabs a knife from a rack bolted to the kitchen wall and slices the bag open. The smell that comes from the bag tells me and Glenda all we need to know. Damn, I say and lean back against the table as my shoulders slump. I thought maybe we could salvage some since they were frozen. Poultry goes bad fast, Glenda says and tosses the bag aside. Bring it all in. Let's see if we can salvage a little. Ain't got nothing else to do. So, we haul the rest of the bags inside, and one by one, we slice them open. 6, she says and hurries the 6 legs into the walk-in fridge. We get to keep 6. 6 is good, I say, unable to hide the disappointment in my voice. 6, Glenda says. I can make soup with that. We've got some potatoes and carrots that need to be used up. I'll get to work. She instantly goes into cook mode, and I'm left there, ignoring as she grabs a huge pot down from a shelf and places it on a massive burner. As the flames come to life and lick the bottom of the pot, I turn and walk out of the kitchen, leaving Glenda to her work. I'm exhausted and want to go to my room and just curl up and sleep forever. But with turkey soup for dinner, I'll power through and crash once I've eaten. So, I head to my office. A knocking at my door wakes me up, and I lift my head from my desk, drool spilling out over my lip. Hold on, I mumble as I hunt for a tissue to wipe my mouth. Dinner's ready, Melissa says as she opens the door without holding on like I asked. She raises an eyebrow. Were you asleep? Just a quick nap, I say and run my fingers through my hair. When my hands come down, I stare at them and the strands of hair they hold. Mine's coming out too, she says and frowns. We knew it was going to happen. So soon. It's a minor side effect, she says. Do you have stomach cramps? Night sweats? Vomiting or diarrhea? Not yet. Then be happy you're only losing some hair, she says and looks past me out my office window. It'll get a lot worse for all of us soon, I suppose. So I hear, I say. I yawn and wave away my nap breath. Did you say dinner was ready? Yes, Melissa says. Come on. Glenda says we can each have a large bowl of soup. She expects it to last 3 days, so she's already portioned it all out. Great, I say and follow her out of my office. The smell hits me in the hallway, and my stomach lets out a long, sustained growl. Same, Melissa says with a chuckle. When we reach the cafeteria, I see everyone sitting at tables except for those that are bedridden. The whole room is gulping down turkey soup like it's ice cream. Slow down. Slow down. Dr. Burke cries out. Your stomachs are small and can't handle too much too fast. You'll throw it all up. The sound of retching comes from the corner, and all heads turn to see Joshua puking his guts out onto the floor. When he's done, he sits up, wipes his mouth, then ducks his head. Sorry. I wasted that. That is why you have to slow down, Dr. Burke says. Don't waste the damn soup, you idiots. Glenda shouts as she stands in the doorway to the kitchen. Heads bow to their bowls, and spoons come up much, much slower than before. I'll take some to Mrs. Jansen and Mr. Howard, Melissa says. I grab her arm before she can take a step. Just Mr. Howard, I say. I see her start to argue, then she closes her mouth and nods. No need to waste good soup on someone who's barely awake and whose days are already numbered. Not that any of ours aren't numbered also, but we've got a shot at surviving a lot longer. Mrs. Jansen would probably only have a day or so left, even if the world hadn't started to burn. I hear we got you to thank for this, Mr. Oakhurst says as he wheels up next to my seat. Scott and Joshua helped, I say. Yeah, but you found out where the turkey was. I wish I could have gotten more, I say and look down at the dregs of soup left in my bowl. There was so much still in that freezer, but most of it was too warm already. We're all going to die pretty horribly as it is, Mr. Oakhurst says and looks about the cafeteria. But getting killed by bad turkey would just be embarrassing. I try not to smile but can't help it. He sees me smile and smiles himself. In seconds, we're laughing our heads off. When we both settle down, we see everyone staring at us. You had to be there, Mr. Oakhurst says and pats my arm before he wheels away. Toby, Melissa says from the cafeteria doors. She waves me over. I need you. When I reach her, she pulls me out into the hall. Mrs. Jansen passed away, she says. Looks like it happened right before dinner. Her body was still warmer than room temperature. Her eyes lock onto mine, and I know what she's trying to tell me without actually telling me. I'll get Dr. Burke. You get Mrs. Jansen, I say and rub my face. We'll meet in the kitchen. Are you sure? This was as much your idea as it was mine. I know, she says and looks away. It's not like we have a choice. Oh, we have a choice, I say. We cannot kid ourselves over that. We have a choice. I sigh. Just not a good one. She looks back at me, then nods and walks off to do her part of this thing we're doing. I go back into the cafeteria and find Dr. Burke. When I catch his eye, I jerk my head toward the kitchen door. He frowns. I raise my eyebrows and jerk my head toward the door again. He nods and gets up. What do you need? Glenda asks when I walk into the kitchen, but when she sees Dr. Burke coming right behind me, she only nods, knowing exactly what I need. She stops washing dishes, wipes her hands, tosses the towel aside, then crosses her arms over her chest. Who is it? She asks. Is it Mrs. Jansen? Yes, I say. I liked her, Glenda says. She never sent a dish back or complained. I want to go on record that I am not for this, Dr. Burke says. Noted, I reply. What record? Glenda asks and laughs. Pretty sure all the records got nuked in DC. Well, I just needed to say it, Dr. Burke says. The doors at the opposite side of the kitchen burst open as a gurney is wheeled into the room. We need to hurry, Melissa says. This is madness, Dr. Burke says. Well, Doc, the world's gone apeshit bonkers, so this fits right in, Glenda says and points to a long stainless steel table. Put her next to that. I'll work there. You aren't doing anything until I take a biopsy, Dr. Burke says. Her medication will make her internal organs non-viable, so please, no offal. Are you sure? Glenda asks as she fetches several very large, very sharp knives from the rack on the wall, then steps over to the gurney. Because I was hoping for both liver and kidneys. Lots of nutrition in those. They are the first things you should discard, Dr. Burke says. This is not a cow. This is a human being. Our filtration organs should never be consumed. He sighs and rubs his hands together over and over. Not that any human flesh should ever be consumed. We all stand there and let that sink in. While we'd discussed the issue, we had skirted around saying exactly what the issue was. In order to survive, we need to eat those who die. I'll conduct a biopsy and have the results first thing in the morning, Dr. Burke says. If the results are satisfactory, then we can proceed. If not, then she'll need to be discarded. You mean buried, Glenda says. Like you said, Doc, she ain't no cow. Yes, of course, I meant buried, Dr. Burke responds. I'll go fetch a kit. He hurries out of the kitchen as the doors swing shut. I see someone standing out there. I'll be right back, I say to Glenda and Melissa. I don't care what the doc said, I'm getting started, Glenda says. I can't let her spoil. Melissa catches my eye, and I try to smile at her. I manage a half-decent one by the time I'm through the doors. What's going on? Joshua asks. We're trying to solve a problem, I say and give him an honest, earnest look. Hard decisions have to be made during hard times. But that's Mrs. Jansen, Joshua says, his eyes looking over my head at the kitchen doors. Why is she on a table? I was hoping my hard decisions during hard times statement would have clued him in, but I can see from the way his emotions play across his face that he's struggling with the reality of it all. Joshua, take a walk with me, I say and gently place my hand on his elbow. He jerks away and glares down at me. This ain't right, Mr. LaChance. No, Joshua, it is not, I say. He starts to pace in the hallway, forcing me to dodge his bulk each time he comes my way. She was a good woman, I say. And that doesn't change. She was a good and kind woman. Yes, that's a good memory of her to hold on to. This isn't God's way, he says. Neither is nuclear war, I say. But here we are. God has placed this trial in our path, and we have to overcome it. We don't overcome it by eating an old woman, Joshua shouts and points at the kitchen. That's giving in. No, Joshua, giving in would be not to do this and let everyone slowly starve, I say. Do you think God wants us to slowly starve? He wants us to slowly die of radiation from the fallout, Joshua replies and shrugs. I hear you, I do, I say. But we could survive the fallout. Not actually believing my words. We won't survive starvation. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord, Joshua says and throws his hands in the air. If the ceilings weren't 12 feet, he would have raked his knuckles on the drop-down tiles. He stops pacing and looks at me, sadness in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. LaChance, but I quit, he says. He sniffs hard, and I realize that he's crying. Hey, no need to quit, I say and reach out to pat his elbow again, but he steps back out of my reach. I let my arm fall to my side. Stay on, please. We need you. I can't stay here knowing you were doing that to these people, Joshua says, his eyes on the kitchen door. I'm sorry, Mr. LaChance. He turns and stomps off. I start to call after him, but I know Joshua well enough. His heart is as big as his body, and he won't change his mind. I watch him walk down the hall, then turn toward the back entrance. His truck is parked out there. Where he'll go, I don't know, but I will miss him. He was a good one. When I go back into the kitchen, Glenda has already started. I have to cover my mouth at the sight of the cook up to her elbows in Mrs. Jansen's body as she scoops out the organs and tosses them into a black trash can. As soon as I know I'm not going to throw up, I say to Melissa, "Joshua quit." "What?" she asks, and I can figure she's fighting her gorge too. Between the two of us, we've been in this business for at least 45 years or more. We've seen horrific things in these halls and in halls like these, but the sight of Glenda butchering Mrs. Jansen is almost too much. Almost. He saw what was happening in here, and he says he can't be a part of it. Where's he going to go? How is he going to survive out there? I don't know, but it's not my responsibility anymore. I have Peaceful Acres to worry about. She watches me carefully, then nods. Melissa and I are rarely of one mind, but when we are, it's comforting to know I don't have to fully explain myself. Peaceful Acres is my responsibility, and she gets that. Dr. Burke walks back into the kitchen, and I tell him about Joshua. He doesn't really say anything except for a quiet grunt and then a nod. After taking biopsies from 3 different parts of Mrs. Jansen's anatomy, he leaves the kitchen without a word. His attitude bothers me more than it should. I understand that what we are doing is taboo, but what alternatives do we have? Melissa leaves moments later, needing to check on the residents and help clean up the cafeteria. When Glenda finishes dressing Mrs. Jansen's body, which is what I have to call it since it's the same process as dressing a deer or elk or pig, she starts in on the actual butchering. The second she raises the large butcher's knife, I turn and swallow hard, then say, "I'll be in my office. I'll let you know when I'm done, LaChance." I should go help clean the cafeteria, but I just don't have it in me. It's been a long day, and I'm exhausted, so I skip my office and head straight for my room. After a very long shower, I dress in sweats and a t-shirt and plop down into the one luxury I've allowed myself, a plush leather recliner. It used to belong to a resident, but she passed away just as the world was turned to fire and fallout. I waited a few days before I moved it into my room. I have a book sitting next to the chair, but I don't pick it up. Instead, I stare out the window as day becomes dusk and twilight takes over. I wonder how many people are actually left in the area. How many stayed, knowing that things would get bad. Not that there are many places left for anyone to go. I heard a rumor, and I'm not one to put much stock into rumors, but I did get it from a credible source that ships were massing along the Oregon and Northern California coasts, ready to pick up refugees and take them where the fallout will be less lethal. One of the attendants, before he disappeared in the night, suggested we load all the residents up and head that way. I laughed at the idea. It was rude to laugh at the young man, he was only trying to help. But the idea of loading up all of the residents with all of the equipment needed to keep many of them functional and traveling a couple thousand miles in the hopes that someone was there to save us was just funny. We are on our own here at Peaceful Acres, and I have made peace with that. The twilight becomes full darkness, and I go to switch on a light when I hear a knock at the door. A voice whispers from the other side. I get up and open the door to find Melissa standing there. She looks up at me. I look down at her. She pushes past me into my room, and I slowly close the door behind her. In the morning, Melissa is gone before I wake up. Knowing how dedicated she is, I don't take any offense to her absence. I get up and take a short shower, then I dress for the day and pull open my door. "Toby!" Melissa shouts, and I see her running down the hallway toward me. She skids to a stop when she sees me standing outside my door. "Follow me." "What is it?" "Just follow me," she says, and I have to run to keep up with her. When she leads me to Dr. Burke's office, a stone drops in my guts. I don't even have to walk in to know what's happened. "I found him and came straight to you," she says. "I did check his pulse first, though. He's long gone." I step into the office and brace myself for the smell of feces. Like many, Dr. Burke's bowels loosened when he passed. It takes a good moment of the last of my remaining courage to step behind the desk, check his pulse myself, then pick up the note he left addressed to me. It reads, "Toby, please know I didn't do this out of cowardice. I just cannot be a part of a world like this. I've died a little more every day, and I do not mean from the fallout. That only scratches the surface. In weeks, we'd all be gone anyway because of the radiation. The potassium iodide pills we have on hand are far from sufficient. I know this will leave a hole in the residents' care, Toby, but you have to know that their days were numbered before the nukes fell. Now, all we are doing is prolonging the physical, emotional, and psychological suffering of people we swore to care for. I beg you to see what I have done as a pathway to peace. Think of it as a kindness, I say out loud and hold the note out to Melissa. I read it, she says. Kindness is what you always talk about. I know, I say. He's playing my heartstrings. I pick up the bottle on his desk and see that it is oxycodone. He must have stashed this away before I removed all the painkillers from the pharmacy and put them in my safe. What do we tell the residents? Nothing, I say. If anyone asks, we'll say he's under the weather and self-quarantining in case it's contagious. Can we? She asks, knowing my mind will fill out the rest of her question on my own. He's been dead too long, and there are drugs in his system, I say. He isn't any use to us. Then I see another piece of paper on the desk. I pick it up. Biopsies are clean, I say. Mrs. Jansen is viable. I stuff the suicide note into my pocket and set the biopsy results back on the desk. I'll let Glenda know, I say, and leave the office. Melissa grabs my arm and turns me around. So, we're doing this? We're doing this, I say. I really wish we weren't, but we are. She studies my face for several seconds, then nods, gives my arm a squeeze, and walks off to continue her morning duties. I head for the cafeteria. Glenda is just finishing up dishing out the breakfast rations. I watch her ladle turkey soup into bowls and set a piece of stale bread on top of each. She pauses as she places the last piece on a bowl and picks something off the bread, probably mold. It wouldn't kill anyone, but we're still trying to at least make things pleasant. La chance, Glenda says when she's done serving and rings a bell. What can I do for you? It's a go, I say, then pause as Scott comes in to roll the cart of bowls out to the cafeteria. Once he's gone, I continue. The biopsies came back clear. You can start cooking as soon as possible. What do we tell the residents? Do you still have some potatoes and carrots left? Yeah. Then this time, we'll say it's turkey soup. I'll tell them I went back last night and found more. This time, she says and raises an eyebrow. This time, I reply. Next time, I'll tell them the truth about this batch so they all know that they've already participated before they decide to keep eating. You don't think keeping it from them now is kind of immoral? It is, yes, I say and laugh a sad laugh. But the whole world is immoral, Glenda. I just want them to have one last bit of relief and happiness before neither of those things exist anymore. She nods and wipes her hands on her apron. I'll get started right now, she says. I'll mix in the last bit of turkey soup so the flavors are a little closer. We can have it for dinner. Dinner? I say. The note said yes. Dinner. Good idea. I'll leave you to it, I say, and I do. I have no desire to watch her turn Mrs. Jansen into stew. Once in my office, I collapse into my desk chair. All I can do for the next hour is stare down at the whiteboard where I have spent hours upon hours doodling while I was on conference calls and Zoom meetings. I see what I think was an attempt at a rabbit, which causes me to spin my chair around and stare out the window at the dying grass or grains, or whatever is out there in those fields across the road from Peaceful Acres. Then I look up into the sky, but there's no hawk circling. Even he's gone now. When I look back down at the fields, a thought hits me. The fields used to be tended by farmers who truly cared for what they were doing, just like me, in a way. I tend to the residents similarly, and as I look at the wilted and browned vegetation, I have to wonder if I have been doing right by them. Have I really been putting the residents ahead of my own wants and needs and wishes? I get up and leave the office quickly, on the hunt for some answers to that question. When I find Mr. Oakhurst in his room, I knock and say, "Mind if I come in?" "Something on your mind?" he asks, eyeing me the whole way as I walk in and sit down in a folding chair he has set up by his own recliner. "You can say that," I reply and rub my face. "Can you be honest with me?" "You ever known me not to be?" he responds with a laugh and pats my arm. Of course, of course. What's up? Am I helping? Helping? Sure you are. None of this runs without you. I appreciate that, but I don't mean am I helping with all the duties needed to keep this place going. I mean, am I helping by even allowing this place to keep going at all? No one wants to die, but we're all going to die, Mr. Oakhurst. Many will die very soon. Some will linger, and some will suffer, he says, finishing my sentence. That's my worry, I say and sigh. That there will come a point where those of us who are left will no longer have a chance at a last bit of kindness. A last bit of kindness, Mr. Oakhurst echoes, then he takes a deep breath and lets it out. I heard about the dock, he says. You have? I ask, surprised. It's a small facility, Tobias, he says and gives me a warm smile. Not many secrets it's around here. The smile is warm, but there is seriousness in his eyes. You came to me for a little advice, right? I did, yes. Then here's a little bit I think you should seriously consider, he says and closes his eyes. I wait for him to finish, and I almost worry he's fallen asleep when he opens his eyes again. I think having a full belly and a little hope would be a wonderful kindness for us all to go out on, he says, and the seriousness in his eyes turns to a fierce focus. It's a beautiful day out today. Should be an amazing sunset. Maybe we can all have dinner outside this evening, look up at the sky, and watch the colors change. And just be with ourselves for one final moment. The reality of what he's suggesting is hard to take in, but he isn't wrong. I came to ask him for advice on whether or not I was just postponing the inevitable, and he gave me the advice I may not have been looking for but now know I need. Thank you, I smile down at him. I think that sounds like a lovely idea. Me too, he says. Can you make it happen in a way that will be kind? My mind goes to my wall safe. Yes, I can, I say. I pat his shoulder. I'll see you at dinner. I immediately go and gather the staff. I cannot do this on my own, and I refuse to involve anyone who does not want to be involved. When I'm done explaining things, I see tears and sadness, but no one says no. No one jumps up shouting that what I have proposed is monstrous. In fact, everyone seems to be resigned to the idea. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought along these lines before. I guess I'm a little surprised and relieved that everyone else has too. Dinner? Melissa asks. Dinner, I say. I nod at everyone, and they all nod back. Then I adjourn the meeting. Glenda, I call as I watch the woman walk back to the kitchen. I need your skills. You bet, LaChance, she says, and we go into the kitchen and start doing some math to make sure dosage to portion ratios are what they need to be. Then I go back to my office, open the safe, and take out every last pill. If the numbers Glenda and I crunched are correct, then this will do the trick and then some. In fact, it should only take one bowl apiece. Even though Glenda is cooking 3 times that, she originally wanted to freeze some of Mrs. Jansen, but no point in freezing it now. There'll be no one to thaw the leftovers after tonight. We grind and add the powder to the stew, and Glenda gives it a quick taste. Bitter, she says and goes to grab the last of our honey. This will fix that. Don't keep tasting it, I say to her. I don't want to find you draped over the stove when it's time to serve dinner. Nothing to worry about there, LaChance. After the honey, I'm not trying it anymore. Good, good, I say and nod at her. I turn before the tears can spill down my cheeks. When I get back to my room, I find Melissa there. Just a nap, she says and gets undressed, then slides under my sheets. I undress too and slide in with her. We hold each other as we drift off. She isn't wrong. One last nap sounds perfect. The pounding on my door wakes us both up, and it takes me a second to figure out what's happening. Boss, Scott yells. We got a problem out front. The two of us get dressed, and I yank the door open. Scott doesn't even give us a second look before he starts in. Maynard, is what he says at first. When he shakes his head, he adds, he's got Joshua. Damn that son of a garden, I say and race down the hallway toward the front entrance. Of course, Maynard is a few days early. If someone is going to try to ruin this evening, it'll be Maynard. When I reach the barricade, my eyes fall on a brutally beaten Joshua as he's held up by a man on either side of him. His face is nothing but purple bruises and swollen flesh. I can tell his abdomen hurts him as well by the way his body wants to curl up on itself, but the men holding him up won't allow it, so he is forced to stand there in agony. Sorry, Mr. LaChance, he mumbles from between split and swollen lips. I didn't want to tell them about the turkey, Joshua mumbles, his voice barely audible through his swollen lips. They made me. And it's a good thing too. Maynard steps forward, walking from his truck to stand directly opposite me on the other side of the barricade. Sounds like you found yourself a bit of a bounty, he says, his voice dripping with mockery. We found some turkey legs, yes, I admit. You left a whole lot back at Magnus's place too, Maynard says, his tone shifting to something darker. Too bad it was all spoiled by the time we went and had a look. He looks over his shoulder at Joshua, his expression hardening. That kind of made me angry, he says, his voice low and dangerous. I may have taken my frustrations out on your boy here. Then, just when I think all is lost, he cracks a grin. But then, just when I think all is lost, he cracks and tells us that you made yourself some turkey soup. He licks his lips and grips his rifle tight. I sure could use a bite of some turkey soup right now. Joshua told you about the turkey soup we made yesterday? I ask, playing along. That he did, Maynard says, his eyes narrowing. Did he tell you there was going to be a second batch? Second batch? Maynard's eyes narrow further, and he glances over at Joshua, glaring. No, he did not. Yes, I say, focusing on Joshua. He meets my eyes as I continue. We must have just missed each other. I was able to go back to Magnus's and salvage some more turkey legs. That's probably why you didn't find any good ones. I'd already been there. Really? And what time was this? Here is where it can all fall apart. What I say next will determine how we all die, on our terms or on Maynard's. Around 8 or so, I say, praying that the timing of my lie is correct. He sucks at his cheeks, then nods. I guess we did just miss each other, Maynard says. You're already making a second batch, then? It's no harm, no foul, don't you think? I do, I say, smiling wide. He takes a couple of steps back. You do? I do, I say, nodding at him. I'd like to apologize to you, Maynard. You would? I would. I have been rude and selfish. While my intentions have been to keep the residents of Peaceful Acres safe, I have forgotten that this facility is not an entity unto itself. This place has been, and will continue to be, an integral part of this community. We never closed it off before, always welcoming in everyone when they needed it, whether for singing carols or hiding Easter eggs or ringing in the new year. Peaceful Acres has been a community establishment. I am sorry I have forgotten this. Maynard eyes me for a long while, then turns and looks at the men standing by their trucks in the parking lot. He finally lands on Joshua. The young man only gives him a one-eyed blank stare. When he turns back to me, I see something else in Maynard's eyes besides anger and determination. Is that so? I see a spark of hope, suspicion, and I think that's a great thing to go out on. That'd make it pretty easy for you all to kill us once we're inside. I say and raise my arm up. How many guns you all got in behind him? We won't kill you or harm you in any way, and I will invite you in. There's only a handful of us in there that can even walk without assistance. Even without your guns, you could take us out easily. Look what you did to Joshua, and he's the biggest of us all. We're no match for any of you. Not sure I want to go anywhere unarmed, if you catch my drift, Maynard says. I know, I say, empathizing. But we have to meet halfway here, Maynard. You leaving your weapons is a sign of good faith. Us inviting you in to share a meal with us is our sign of good faith. How about we come together on this one? He hesitates, and I can see the conflict on his face. He's asking himself why he has to share when he can just take. And I'm glad he doesn't ask me that question out loud because I don't have a great answer for him. All right, he says. But if you try anything at all, we'll rip this place apart, starting with you, LaChance. Fair enough, I say and look behind me. I can see Scott and Melissa standing at the front door, their eyes on me. I nod at Melissa. After a couple of seconds, she nods at me. I know she understands. Then I turn back to the parking lot and wave at Maynard's men. Come on. We're eating on the back patio. Turkey soup for everyone. Leave your guns in your trucks. Maynard shouts, and a few men pause. There's some tension, and a few men confer with each other, but most immediately lock their guns in their trucks and hurry toward the barricade. As they line up to be led in, I can see just how malnourished they all are. A few are obviously sick with radiation poisoning. The sight of these sad, sick men makes me believe my decision is the right one. We disassemble part of the barricade, and the men file through. "Your grandmother will be happy to see you," I say to Will Holcomb as he walks by me. "Thanks, Mr. LeChance," he says. I hold up a hand as the last ones filter through. "I'd like a word with Joshua," I say when all who are left are Maynard and the two men keeping the former Peaceful Acres attendant standing. "It better not hold up dinner," Maynard says. "It won't," I reply. The two men shove Joshua at me. They catch him before he falls. "Melissa is inside, and she'll take care of you," I say to Maynard. "We'll be right in." Maynard watches the two of us, then shrugs and walks into the building, his hunger overcoming his suspicions. "I'm so sorry, Mr. LeChance," Joshua says. "Call me Toby." "I couldn't." "You can, and you will." "Okay," he says after a long pause. "I'm so sorry, Toby." "He didn't do anything wrong," I say to him and help walk him to the front door. "In fact, you made it all right." "I did?" he asks, confused. "You did," I say. "Everyone deserves a little kindness, especially now, don't you think?" "So even Maynard?" Joshua asks as he touches his face. "He didn't show me none. He just doesn't know how, is all," I say. "But I do, Joshua. I know how to show a little kindness. And tonight, that kindness is for everyone." "That's awful nice of you, Mr. Toby," Joshua says and tries to laugh. I don't reply as I open the front door, and Scott comes to take Joshua's weight off of me. I watch them walk deeper into the building. I hear laughter echoing down the halls, then a loud shout followed instantly by even more laughter. I smile and turn to face the parking lot. Out beyond it are rotten fields and a dead world. But behind me is life, no matter how short it may be. Life and kindness. Two things very rare these days. LeChance. I hear someone shout. "Dinner's ready. Coming." I yell back and walk away from Peaceful Acres' front door for the very last time. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Story number 2. My name is Adrian Blackfeather, and I'm telling you this as best I can remember it, though it's been a couple of years now. It happened back in 2003, right in the Adara of New York. My people, the Mohawk, have deep roots in this land, though I'd be lying if I said I'd spent much time up there before that night. I guess I thought, given my heritage, I'd get some kind of instinctive understanding of the place, some connection with my ancestors. Yeah, that was dumb. What I got instead was something else entirely. It started as a weekend camping trip with a buddy, Lyle Fontaine. We both liked the idea of getting out of the city and into some fresh mountain air. Lyle, a loud, easygoing guy, always cracked dark jokes, the kind most people wouldn't find funny, but he had a way about him. He once called himself the dark humor aficionado of all things grim, like it was a job title. We packed light, each carrying a tent, sleeping bags, a small camp stove, and more than a few cans of chili and beans. I'd also brought a bow. Hunting with a bow isn't something I'd done much, but I figured it would add to the experience. Lyle joked he'd use it to stave off cabin fever, or tent fever, as he called it. The drive up from the city was uneventful, just a couple of hours of highway giving way to winding roads flanked by endless trees. The air got crisper, the sky a deeper blue the farther north we went. It felt good to leave the concrete and noise behind, to let the forest envelop us. We arrived at the trailhead in the early afternoon, the sun high and warm despite the chill in the air. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a couple of other cars that had seen better days. We shouldered our packs, the weight already digging into my shoulders, a reminder that I spent more time at a desk these days than out in nature. The trail started out wide and well-maintained, a gentle uphill climb that had us stripping off layers within the first half hour. Lyle kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out birds and plants he claimed to recognize, making up increasingly ridiculous names for the ones he didn't. As we climbed higher, the trail narrowed, the trees pressing closer. The air took on a different quality, thicker somehow, like it was saturated with the scent of pine and earth. It was the kind of silence you only find deep in the wilderness, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps and the occasional bird call. We reached our campsite by late afternoon, a small clearing near Blue Mountain Lake. It was a dense part of the forest, where you felt swallowed by the trees and rocks, like nature was an all-encompassing presence pressing in from all sides. We pitched our tents, the nylon a jarring blue against the earth tones of the forest floor. As the sun started its slow descent, we gathered firewood, the snap of dry branches loud in the quiet. Lyle took on the task of building the fire, stacking the wood with a precision that seemed at odds with his usual carefree demeanor. We sat on logs pulled close to the growing flames, the heat welcome as the chill of evening settled around us. Lyle pulled out a flask of whiskey, took a swig, and passed it to me. The alcohol burned going down, but it was a good burn, the kind that spreads warmth from the inside out. The conversation flowed as easily as the whiskey, old stories, and inside jokes, the kind of talk that comes with a comfortable friendship. As the night wore on, our voices grew louder, laughter ringing out in the darkness. We made increasingly elaborate plans for the next day's hike, Lyle suggesting we hunt for Bigfoot or the Adara howler, a creature we just invented. He started cracking jokes about how anything could be out there watching us, but he'd probably just make friends with it. A creature with taste, he said, tapping the side of his nose. It was somewhere close to midnight when we heard it, a low, deep sound echoing through the forest. More like a moan than anything else. It was just enough to cut off our laughter, to make us stare into the dark spaces between the trees. I tried to laugh it off, said something like, "The howler's real," but neither of us felt like joking after that. Lyle, not one to get spooked easily, shrugged and said we'd better turn in. As the fire died down to embers, I crawled into my tent, zipping the flap closed against the night. But I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my gut. That sound had a weight to it, something that didn't feel like it belonged to any animal I'd ever known. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling, trying to will myself to sleep. But every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had me tensing, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heart. The silence felt charged, like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I must have drifted off at some point, exhaustion finally winning out over anxiety, but it felt like mere minutes had passed when a loud rustling jolted me awake. I sat up, heart racing, hand already reaching for the flashlight next to my sleeping bag. I unzipped the tent flap, shining the beam out into the night. The campsite looked exactly as we'd left it, the remains of the fire now cold ash. But something felt off, a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. I swung the light over to Lyle's tent and felt my stomach drop. It looked deflated, empty, like there was no one inside. I called out his name, my voice sounding small and thin in the vastness of the forest. No response. I told myself he'd just gone off to take a leak, that he'd be back any minute, probably laughing at me for getting worried. But as the minutes ticked by with no sign of him, the knot in my gut only tightened. I pulled on my boots and jacket, zipping the tent closed behind me. The night air was cold, my breath fogging in front of me as I walked over to Lyle's tent. I called his name again, louder this time, but still got no response. I pulled back the flap, shining the light inside. His sleeping bag was there, rumpled like he'd gotten up in a hurry, but no Lyle. I stepped back, scanning the trees around the campsite, the beam of the flashlight seeming woefully inadequate against the press of darkness. That's when I saw them. Footprints leading away from Lyle's tent and into the forest. They were boot prints, the tread pattern matching the heavy-duty hiking boots Lyle always wore. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. He had just gone for a walk, maybe to clear his head after the whiskey. But then I remembered the sound we'd heard, the unnaturalness of it, and the relief turned sour in my stomach. I hesitated, torn between waiting for him to come back and going after him, but the thought of him out there alone, with that sound still echoing in my head, propelled me forward. I grabbed my bow and quiver of arrows from my tent, slinging them over my shoulder. It was more for my own reassurance than any real belief that I'd need them. I followed Lyle's footprints, the beam of the flashlight bouncing with each step. They led me deeper into the forest, away from the safety of the campsite. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made me jump. I don't know how long I walked, my eyes glued to the ground, following the trail left by Lyle's boots. But eventually, I looked up and realized I couldn't see the campsite anymore. I was well and truly in the wilderness now. The footprints led me to a small clearing, and then abruptly stopped. I shone the light around, expecting to see Lyle, maybe sitting on a log or leaning against a tree. But the clearing was empty. I walked forward, scanning the ground for any sign of where he might have gone. But there was nothing. No more footprints. No broken branches to indicate his path. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. I was about to turn back, to retrace my steps to the campsite and wait for morning, when a glint of something caught my eye. I moved closer, the beam of the flashlight revealing a shape, half hidden under a bush at the edge of the clearing. My heart in my throat, I reached down and pulled it out. It was Lyle's boot. The mate to the prints I'd been following. But it was torn, the leather shredded like it had been through a meat grinder. And it was stained. Not just with mud and leaves, but with something darker. Something that looked sickeningly like blood. I stood there, holding the ruined boot, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Lyle couldn't be. I couldn't even finish the thought. A snap of branches behind me made me spin around, the beam of the flashlight whipping through the darkness. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It was a shape, a mass of shadows that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. But as my eyes adjusted, the shape resolved into something more terrifying than I could have imagined. It was a creature, but not like any I'd ever seen before. It stood on 4 legs, but its proportions were all wrong. A twisted amalgamation of bear and wolf and something else entirely. Its shoulders were massive, hunched, and powerful, leading up to a head that was more snout than face. I couldn't make out details in the darkness, but I could see the glint of teeth, long and wickedly sharp. And its eyes, glowing a sickly yellow in the beam of the flashlight, fixed on me with an intensity that turned my blood to ice. For a moment, we both stood there, frozen. The creature's nostrils flared, like it was scenting the air, trying to decide if I was prey or threat. I didn't dare move, barely dared to breathe. Then, slowly, it lowered its head, sniffing at the ground around the boot I still held. A low growl rumbled up from its chest. A sound that I felt more than heard, vibrating through the soles of my feet. My mind raced, trying to remember everything I'd ever heard about encountering wild animals. Make yourself big. Make noise. Don't run. But something told me the usual rules didn't apply here. This was no ordinary animal. Carefully, I set the boot down, hoping the creature would lose interest. But as soon as I moved, its head snapped up. Those yellow eyes locked onto me once more. I saw its haunches tense, muscles bunching underneath matted fur. And I knew I had only seconds before it would attack. I unslung my bow, fingers fumbling for an arrow. I'd never shot at a living target before, had only ever practiced on hay bales and paper targets. But it was the only weapon I had. I narked the arrow, drawing the string back to my cheek with shaking hands. The creature watched me, head cocked slightly to the side, almost curious. For a split second, I hesitated. It felt wrong somehow to shoot this thing, like I was violating something ancient and sacred. But then I thought of Lyle, of his shredded boot and the blood staining the ground, and my resolve hardened. I loosed the arrow, aiming for the creature's chest. The arrow struck true, sinking deep into the thick fur. But to my horror, the creature barely flinched. It glanced down at the shaft protruding from its chest, then back up at me, those yellow eyes now blazing with fury. It charged, covering the distance between us in a heartbeat. I scrambled backward, tripping over roots and rocks in my haste to get away, but it was no use. The creature was on me. One massive paw slammed into my chest, pinning me to the ground. Up close, the smell of it was overwhelming, a rank mixture of wet animal and something else. Something sickly sweet and rotten. Its breath was hot on my face, saliva dripping from bared fangs. I struggled, kicking and clawing at the arm that held me down, but it was like fighting against a tree trunk, unyielding and immovable. The creature growled again, the sound vibrating through my body. And I knew, with sick certainty, I was about to die. But just as I braced myself for the killing blow, the pressure on my chest suddenly lifted. The creature stepped back, its head swinging around to look at something behind it. For a moment, I lay there, stunned, gasping for breath. Then I heard it. A voice, high and terrified, calling my name. Adrian, Adrian, where are you? It was Lyle. He was alive. And he was looking for me. The creature's head swiveled back to me, those yellow eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought it would finish me off, Lyle's shouts be damned. But then it turned, loping off into the darkness with a speed that belied its size. I lay there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. I'd been seconds away from death, saved only by Lyle's voice. Lyle, who I thought was gone, torn apart by that thing. I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the pain in my chest where the creature's paw had pinned me. I was pretty sure I had some cracked ribs, but I couldn't focus on that now. I had to find Lyle. I called out to him, my voice hoarse and shaky. Lyle, I'm here. Follow my voice. There was a crashing in the underbrush, the beam of a flashlight bouncing erratically through the trees. Then Lyle burst into the clearing, his face pale in the darkness. He pulled up short when he saw me, taking in my disheveled state, the bow hanging limply from my hand. What happened? He asked, his voice tight with fear. I heard. I don't know what I heard. It sounded like an animal, but not like any animal I've ever heard before. I shook my head, not sure how to even begin to explain. There was something out here. A creature. It attacked me. Lyle's eyes widened. Attacked you? Are you okay? What kind of creature? I don't know, I said honestly. It was like a bear. But, not a bear. And it was intelligent. Like it knew what it was doing. I glanced down at the ruined boot, still lying where I'd dropped it. Lyle, I think it got you. His gaze followed mine, his face going even paler when he saw the boot. Slowly, he lifted his foot, revealing a sock, torn and blooded. I don't remember what happened, he murmured, his voice shaking. I woke up out in the woods. My foot was hurting like hell. My boot was gone. I must have lost it somehow. A chill ran down my spine. How could he not remember? What had that creature done to him? To him. We need to get out of here, I said, making the decision. Now. Before it comes back. Lyle didn't argue. We set off back toward the campsite, moving as quickly as we could in the dark. I kept my bow at the ready, an arrow narked and pointing into the shadows. But the forest was silent. No sign of the creature. When we reached the campsite, we packed up in a frenzy, not bothering to take down the tents, just stuffing everything into our backpacks and setting off down the trail, putting as much distance between us and that clearing as possible. We hiked through the night, neither of us willing to stop and rest. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves had us jumping, spinning around, expecting to see those glowing yellow eyes staring back at us. But nothing followed. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, we finally allowed ourselves to slow down. We collapsed on a fallen log, exhausted and shaking with adrenaline. What the hell was that thing? Lyle asked, his voice raw. And what did it do to me? I shook my head, at a loss. I don't know, but I don't think it's done with us. We need to tell someone, the rangers or something. Lyle let out a humorless laugh. And tell them what? That we were attacked by a monster in the woods. They'll think we're crazy. He was right, of course. Who would believe us? Even I was having a hard time believing it, and I'd seen the thing up close. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't natural. And it wasn't going to stop. Not until it got what it wanted. And I had a sinking feeling that what it wanted was us. We made it back to civilization by mid-morning, stumbling out of the woods onto a dirt road that led to the nearest ranger station. Our bodies ached with exhaustion. Our minds reeled from the events of the night. The ranger on duty took one look at us and immediately started asking questions. What happened? Are you okay? Do you need medical attention? I let Lyle do the talking, too tired and shaken to try explaining. He gave a stripped-down version of events, leaving out the more unbelievable parts. We'd been camping, he said. Heard a strange noise in the night. I'd gone to investigate and been attacked by something, an animal, but he hadn't gotten a good look at it. He'd managed to scare it off, and we'd hiked out as soon as it was light. The ranger listened, his face creased with concern. He radioed for backup, insisting we go to the hospital to get checked out. We didn't argue. I wanted to be as far away from those woods as possible. At the hospital, we were poked and prodded, our wounds cleaned and bandaged. I had 2 cracked ribs from where the creature had pinned me down. Lyle had deep gashes on his foot and ankle, like claw marks. The doctors asked us what had happened, but we stuck to our story. An animal attack. We didn't know what kind. They stitched us up and sent us on our way with painkillers, antibiotics, and a warning to stay out of the woods. As if we needed to be told. We gave our statements to the police, too, once they got involved. They seemed skeptical. Kept asking if we'd been drinking. If we might have imagined it. I didn't blame them. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't have believed it either. In the end, they chalked it up to a rogue bear. Maybe a sick or injured one that had lashed out in fear. They said they'd send some officers out to the campsite to look for signs of it, to warn other hikers in the area. Lyle and I just nodded. Too tired to argue. We went back to the city. Back to our lives. But nothing was the same. I couldn't sleep, couldn't close my eyes without seeing those glowing yellow ones staring back at me. Lyle was even worse off. He jumped at every noise. Every shadow. He stopped going out. Stopped answering his phone. I tried to talk to him about it, but he shut me down every time. Didn't want to think about it, he said. Didn't want to remember. But I knew he did remember. More than he was letting on. I saw it in the haunted look in his eyes. In the way his hands would shake when he thought no one was watching. Weeks passed. Then months. The police never found any sign of the creature. No tracks. No fur. No scat. It was like it had never existed. Like we'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew we hadn't. I had the scars to prove it, both physical and mental. And I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. That thing, whatever it was still out there. And it had a taste for us now. I started researching. Digging into old newspaper archives. Online forums. Looking for any mention of strange animal attacks. Of creatures that didn't fit into any known category. And I found them. Not many. But enough to know we weren't the only ones. Stories stretching back decades. Centuries. Tales of hunters disappearing in the woods. Of livestock found mutilated in their pens. And always, the same description. A beast that walked on 4 legs but moved with an almost human intelligence. The more I read, the more convinced I became. This was no ordinary animal. This was something else. Something ancient. Malevolent. Something that had been lurking in the shadows of the Adera for longer than anyone could remember. And now, it had set its sights on us. Lyle and I. We were marked. For what purpose? I couldn't begin to guess. But I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, it would be back for us. It was only a matter of time. That time came sooner than I expected. A little over a year after our encounter in the woods. A crisp autumn day. With a bite in the air. That promised an early winter. I was at work, staring blankly at my computer screen, when my phone buzzed. A text from Lyle. Just 2 words. It's back. My blood turned to ice. I knew immediately what he meant, knew it with the same certainty that I knew my own name. The creature. The beast from the woods. My fingers shook as I dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. His breathing was heavy, panicked. I saw it, he whispered. It was outside my window, just staring at me. A pause. Those eyes, Adrian. Those _ eyes. I tried to calm him down, to get him to tell me exactly what had happened, but he was hysterical. His words tumbled over each other in a rush of terror. It knows where I live. It found me. Oh, God, Adrian, it's never going to let us go, is it? It's going to keep coming for us, until we're dead. I didn't have an answer, because I knew he was right. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to stop. Not until it had what it wanted. Stay put, I told him. Lock your doors. Close your windows. Don't let anyone in. I'm coming over. We'd figure this out together. But even as I said the words, I knew they were hollow. What could we do, really? Go to the police? They'd laughed us off the first time. And even if they did believe us, what could they possibly do against that? No. We were on our own. Just like we had been in those woods. I made it to Lyle's apartment in record time, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. I took the stairs 2 at a time, unwilling to wait for the elevator. His door was ajar. The lock was splintered, forced open. A wave of dread crashed over me, so strong it nearly sent me to my knees. Lyle? I called, pushing the door open. No answer. The apartment was in shambles. Furniture overturned. Books and papers scattered across the floor. Like a struggle had taken place. And in the middle of the wreckage, a single hiking boot. Torn. Blooded. Just like the one I'd found in the woods. Just like Lyle's had been. I picked it up with shaking hands, bile rising in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Not again. But it was. The creature had come for Lyle, just like he'd said it would. And now it had him. I sank to my knees, clutching the boot to my chest, my mind spiraling into panic. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to start. All I knew was, Lyle was gone, taken by a monster I couldn't even begin to understand. And I was next. That much, I was sure of. It might not be today, might not be tomorrow, but someday, somewhere, that creature would come for me, too. And when it did, I had to be ready. The next few weeks were a haze of fear and desperation. I barely slept, barely ate. Every waking moment was consumed with thoughts of the creature, of what it might be doing to Lyle. I scoured books, newspapers, online forums, searched for anything that could explain what we were dealing with. Most people thought I was crazy. Some listened. A few went pale when I described the creature, its unnatural movements, the intelligence in its gaze. But none of them had answers. No solutions. Only theories. Some said it was a Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that possessed humans and turned them into cannibals. Others claimed it was a skinwalker, a witch that could transform into an animal at will. None of it helped. None of it brought me any closer to finding Lyle, or stopping the creature that had taken him. Until I found it. An old Mohawk legend. A dusty tome buried in the back of a university library, its pages brittle with age. It spoke of a beast that haunted the forests of the Adara. A creature that was neither animal nor human. A predator that hunted with cunning intelligence. That lured its prey into the depths of the woods, and feasted on their flesh. But there was more. The legend spoke of a way to kill it. A weapon. Forged in the fires of the underworld. A blade that could pierce its hide. A weapon that could end its reign of terror. Was it real? A long shot. A fairy tale. Born of desperation and fear. But it was all I had. And I was willing to try anything. Risk everything. If it meant saving Lyle. I set out for the Adara the next day. Armed with nothing but a backpack full of supplies. And a determination that bordered on madness. I didn't know where to start. Didn't know if I'd find the weapon. Or if I'd even make it out alive. But I had to try. For Lyle. For myself. For every poor soul that had ever fallen victim to the creature's hunger. I hiked deep into the woods, deeper than I had ever gone before. Old trails faded into nothing beneath my feet. I followed half-forgotten paths that led to places no human had trod in centuries. The air grew heavy, charged with something ancient, something watching. And then, in a clearing ringed by towering trees, I found it. A cave. Its entrance was hidden beneath a tangled snarl of vines and thorns, as if the forest itself wanted to keep it sealed away. A pulse of malevolent energy radiated from its depths, a darkness so thick it made my skin crawl. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that this was it. This was where the weapon lay. This was where the key to ending the nightmare was hidden. I took a slow, measured breath, steeling myself. And then I plunged into the darkness. The cave swallowed me whole. It was darker than anything I had ever experienced. My flashlight barely cut through the void, the light seemed to vanish, sucked away by something unseen. My breath echoed, shallow and ragged. Still, I pressed forward, feeling my way along damp, jagged walls. My heart pounded, each beat hammering against my ribs like a warning. Above me, tons of rock loomed, waiting. If the cave collapsed, I'd be buried. Forgotten. Another lost soul swallowed by the mountain. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when I was so close. The tunnel twisted and coiled like the guts of some massive beast. I lost track of time, of direction. My sense of reality blurred. Was I even moving forward? Or was I just wandering in circles, doomed to starve or go mad in this endless labyrinth? Then, just as despair began to take hold, a glimmer, a faint flicker of light danced on the walls ahead. Hope surged through me. My exhaustion vanished. I stumbled forward, my pace quickening, until I stepped into the chamber. And I froze. It was vast. The ceiling soared high above me, lost in shadows. The walls, every inch of them, were covered in drawings. Crude, ancient carvings, scratched into the stone with something sharp and jagged. Scenes of hunts. Great beasts falling beneath spears and arrows. And in the center of it all, the creature. The same creature that had haunted my dreams. That had stolen Lyle from me. But here, in this ancient depiction, it was not the hunter. It was the hunted. Cowering before a figure holding aloft a spear of blazing light. My heart slammed against my ribs. The weapon. The one from the legend. Desperately, I scanned the chamber. My eyes darted over the stone, searching, hoping. And then I saw it. There. On a rough-hewn pedestal. The spear. It was beautiful, terrible in its beauty. The shaft was polished wood, black as a starless night, so dark it seemed to drink the light around it. And the blade. The blade was like nothing I had ever seen. A metal that glowed, pulsing with an inner fire, flickering like something alive. I reached for it. My fingers trembled as they closed around the hilt, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through me. But then, a voice. Low. Cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. And there, standing at the entrance to the chamber, was Lyle. Or at least, something wearing his face. His warm brown eyes were gone, replaced by a sickly, inhuman yellow. His smile, the same smile I had known, the same one I had trusted, was now twisted into something cruel. Lyle, I whispered, my voice cracking. Is that you? The thing that wore his skin laughed. The sound sent ice down my spine. Lyle's gone, it said. Its voice was a guttural growl, something ancient and wrong. He's been gone for a long time now. Ever since that night in the woods. The thing took a step closer. Ever since I first tasted his flesh. Horror crashed over me, thick and suffocating. The creature, the thing that had stalked us, haunted us. It had been inside Lyle. All along. You're not going to stop me, I said, tightening my grip on the spear. I'm going to kill you. And I'm going to get Lyle back. Another laugh. Dry. Mocking. Like bones snapping. You can try, it whispered. But you'll fail. Just like all the others who came before you. Then, it lunged. Its face twisted into something monstrous, its mouth splitting into a maw of jagged teeth. Its claws tore through the air, slicing toward my skin. Its breath, hot and rancid, hit my face as it snarled. But I was ready. I brought the spear up, the blade flashing in the dim light. And as the creature bore down on me, as its claws raked my skin, as its teeth snapped inches from my throat, I struck. I drove the spear into its chest with every ounce of strength I had left. The creature howled, a sound that rattled the very walls of the cave. It staggered back, black blood gushing from the wound, but it didn't fall. With a roar of fury, it reached down, claws trembling, and ripped the spear from its flesh, tossing it aside like a broken twig. Its eyes burned, filled with hatred so intense it seemed to scorch the air between us. And then it came at me again. I fought. I fought with everything I had, every scrap of strength, every last ounce of will. But it wasn't enough. The creature was too strong, too fast. It overpowered me, slamming me to the ground, pinning me beneath its weight. A clawed hand closed around my throat. I gasped, choking, struggling against the crushing force. The creature leaned in, its breath hot and fetid against my skin. "You failed," it whispered. The words slithered into my ear like poison. But even as my life drained from me, I realized I hadn't failed. Not really, because I had faced my fear. I had faced the monster that haunted me for so long, and in doing so, I had freed myself from its grip, even if only for a moment. As the world dimmed, as the last vestiges of my consciousness faded, I saw Lyle's face one last time. Not the twisted, cruel mask the creature had made of him, but the real Lyle. The friend I had loved. The man I had fought so hard to save. And in that moment, I knew. I had won. Maybe not in the way I had hoped. Maybe not in the way the legends had promised. But I had faced my demon. And that, in itself, was a victory. Story number 3. My name is Mason Tallbear. I grew up as part of the Dinarina Athabascan tribe, and the wilderness has always been my home. The rugged, untamed beauty of the Alaskan landscape runs in my blood, each mountain and river as familiar to me as the lines on my weathered hands. But I wouldn't call myself a mountain man or anything like that. Sure, I spent plenty of time outdoors, hunting, fishing, and soaking in the solitude, but I had a life back in town too. A small cabin. A truck that mostly ran. A job with the Department of Fish and Game. It was a simple life. And I liked it that way. But this time I was out there alone. No fancy camping setup. Just a week to myself and a tent that had seen better days. After a rough breakup and work stress piling up like cordwood, the quiet of the wilderness seemed like exactly what I needed, a chance to clear my head, breathe in that crisp, pine-scented air, and let the weight of everyday life melt away. The locals, though, they weren't so sure. When they heard I'd be camping alone, especially once they learned where I was headed, something in their expressions shifted. They warned me. Told me that Alaska wasn't a place to take lightly. The weather could turn in an instant. The terrain was unforgiving. And in the Kenai, where bears and wolves roamed freely, well, let's just say they thought I was asking for trouble. I laughed it off with a joke about my ex being scarier than any wildlife. But their faces stayed serious. Blank. They had seen too many outsiders, eyes bright with adventure, underestimate the wild. Too many who never came back. As I left the last general store, a tiny wooden shack stocked with basic provisions, the clerk muttered something under his breath. I barely caught it. "Hope you come back in one piece." Maybe it was just my imagination, but a chill ran down my spine despite the late summer warmth. I shook it off. Shouldered my pack. Set off down the trail with determined strides. The first few days were uneventful. Almost idyllic. I set up camp near the Kenai River, just beyond the tree line, where the forest thickened into a dense tangle of spruce and hemlock. Far from any official hiking trails. Each morning, I ventured out to fish for salmon, watching their silvery bodies flicker beneath the crystal-clear water. I cleaned my catch, cooked it over a small fire, and savored each smoky, flaky bite in silence. And oh, the silence. No hum of traffic. No buzz of electronics. No distant voices. Just the whisper of the wind through the trees, the murmur of the river, and the occasional haunting cry of a loon. The air smelled sharp and cleaned pine, damp earth, the crisp bite of early autumn creeping in. The kind of cold that wakes up your senses, that makes you feel alive. Then came the third night, and something changed. At first, it was just a feeling. A prickle at the back of my neck. A presence. Something watching. I told myself it was nothing. Just the unease of being alone in the wilderness for too long. Just my mind playing tricks. But then, I heard it. A sound beyond the firelight. A low, deliberate snuffling. Like an animal catching a scent. Like a bear. But, not quite. Too careful. Too precise. A cold weight settled in my gut. My hand drifted instinctively to the hunting knife at my belt, the worn leather grip molding to my palm like an old friend. I strained to listen, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Something was out there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. And whatever it was watching me. I scanned the perimeter with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the inky darkness. Nothing. Just the still sentinels of the trees, their silhouettes rigid and unmoving. The undergrowth rustled softly in the night breeze, but that was all. And yet, something was there. I'd had enough run-ins with bears to know this wasn't one. The sound was too close to the ground, too rhythmic and intentional, methodical inspection of the area. Bears, for all their strength, aren't exactly subtle. But this thing knew how to be quiet. How to blend into the shadows. Like it was born to them. Morning came. I checked the area around my camp, expecting to find some trace of my nocturnal visitor. But there were no paw prints. No torn food bags. No tufts of fur snagged on branches. Just one thing, something that made no sense. A small pile of bones. Picked clean. Neatly stacked. Right where I had left my backpack the night before. I crouched, staring at them. They were tiny, delicate, almost brittle-looking. A bird. A rodent. I told myself it was just some predator's leavings. An owl, maybe. A fox. Anything to quiet the unease trickling down my spine. Another night passed. Quiet. Almost too quiet. I nearly convinced myself I had imagined it. That it was nothing more than an overactive imagination, twisted by solitude. But then, the fifth night came, and the snuffling returned. Louder this time. Closer. It circled the edges of my campsite, never quite stepping into the fire's light, but always there. Then the sound changed. A scraping. A clawing at the hard-packed earth just beyond my tent. I sat up slowly, every muscle tensed, fingers wrapping around the knife now kept within reach at all times. A meager defense. But better than nothing. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to stay still despite the hammering in my chest. Scratch. 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 Then, the scraping stopped. Replaced by something worse. A dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled through dirt and fallen leaves. It circled the tent. Again. And again. Each time, drawing closer. But never quite touching the thin nylon walls that suddenly felt as flimsy as tissue paper. I braced myself. For the moment those unseen claws would tear through. For the hot stink of foul breath to wash over me. But then, silence. Not just quiet. An absence of sound. So complete it felt like a weight pressing down on me. The forest, so full of life during the day, had gone utterly still. I strained to listen. Nothing. Minutes ticked by. Then more. The tension became unbearable, my nerves raw and frayed. But eventually, dawn came. The first grey light seeped through the tent walls, painting everything a ghostly shade. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Slowly, I uncurled my fingers from the knife. My joints ached, stiff from gripping it too tightly. I stepped outside. And froze. The bright sunlight was almost blinding after the long darkness, but when my eyes adjusted, the ground around my tent was disturbed. Deep furrows gouged into the earth. Like something had been digging. Searching. For what? And then, perched atop my tent. A feather. Long. Black as a moonless night. And nothing like I'd ever seen before. The oily sheen of it caught the morning light, reflecting faint, unnatural hues. I hesitated, then reached out. It was cold. Slick. A chill rolled through me. This wasn't from any bird I knew. Not in all my years trekking through these woods. I tried to laugh it off, tell myself it was some elaborate prank. Maybe the locals trying to scare off an outsider. But deep down, I knew better. There were things out here. Ancient things. Things that had roamed these lands long before man ever set foot on them. I packed my camp and moved. Further upriver. Away from the dense tree line. I reasoned that whatever was stalking me, it would feel more exposed in open ground. Less inclined to approach without the cover of the forest. But even as I hoisted my pack and set off, I felt it. Watching. Tracking me from the shadows. The forest felt different now. The usual chatter of birds and small animals was gone. A silence had settled. Not empty, but waiting. And as I hiked, jumping at every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, I realized. The wilderness no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of a branch, every distant wolf's howl, had me bolt upright, heart hammering, waiting for whatever was out there to finally step into the light. I clutched my knife, knuckles white around the hilt, trying to will myself to relax, to sink into the oblivion of sleep. And then, the dragging returned, slower this time, almost leisurely, like it knew it had all the time in the world. It moved with a steady, relentless patience. The scrape of claws against earth and stone growing louder. Closer. I lay there, paralyzed, barely daring to breathe. Then, snap. A loud crack echoed through the night, like a dry branch snapping over a knee. Adrenaline surged through my veins. Before I could think better of it, I was fumbling with the tent zipper. The need to see, to confront whatever was out there overriding all common sense. I peeked out, flashlight clutched in a trembling hand. At first, I saw nothing. Just inky shadows pooled between the trees. Then, something moved. A massive shape, half hidden in the darkness. Distorted. Like a bear that had been stretched and twisted into some nightmarish parody of itself. It was tall. Taller than any animal I had ever seen. Hunched shoulders. Arms that were too long, hanging past where its knees should have been. And those arms ended in claws. Curved. Glinting dully in the faint moonlight. Each one as long as a hunting knife. My breath caught. It moved, and the sheer wrongness of it sent a shudder rippling through me. Its limbs jerked, uncoordinated. Like a puppet with half its strings cut. It didn't walk. It shuffled. Dragging its feet through the underbrush with a slow, scraping gait. Then, it turned. And I saw its face. It was like something out of a fever dream. A twisted amalgamation of animal features that didn't quite fit together. It had the long, pointed snout of a fox. But too thin. Too elongated. Stretched out like putty pulled to its limit. Its eyes were sunken. Just dark pits in the gaunt ruin of its face. But I felt them on me. Felt the weight of that dead, soulless gaze. Then, it grinned. And my stomach dropped. Its mouth spanned nearly the entire width of its face. Lined with jagged, uneven teeth. Not like fangs. Like shards of bone jammed haphazardly into rotting gums. And that grin. It wasn't mindless. It was knowing. Hungry. Something feral and intelligent lurked behind those hollow eyes. A predator playing with its food. My breath hitched. My body screamed to move, but I was frozen, locked in place by that horrible, leering expression. Then, I tore my gaze away. Fumbled for the tent zipper. Tried, desperately, to seal myself away from the thing waiting in the dark. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the metal tab. The zipper stuck. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Move. 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 Finally. The rasp of metal. The zipper slid shut. I collapsed back, knees drawn to my chest, quaking in the suffocating silence. The thin fabric of the tent was nothing. A flimsy barrier between me and the nightmare just outside. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run. To bolt. to put as much distance as I could between myself and this thing. But some deeper, primal instinct whispered that to run would be a mistake. That this thing would chase, would run me down like a rabbit, would drag me into the darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, tried to breathe, tried to not think about that. So I waited. Minute after agonizing minute ticked by, each one an eternity. Outside, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just that eerie, suffocating silence. The occasional gust of wind rattled the tent, making my breath hitch, but nothing else. Had it gone? Had it ever been there at all? Dawn came. At the first watery hints of grey light, I finally dared to move. My muscles screamed in protest as I uncurled from my huddled position. I swallowed hard. Then, with excruciating slowness, I unzipped the tent, stepped outside, and froze. The creature was gone, vanished, back into the shadows, like a bad dream. But the signs remained. Gouges in the earth, wide swaths of ground torn up, broken branches, uprooted saplings. And there, half buried in the dirt, another feather, the twin of the first, black, shining with that same oily iridescence. I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. And I knew, with a sick, sinking certainty, this wasn't a prank. This wasn't some elaborate hoax by the locals. This was real. Something ancient. Something hungry. Something terrifyingly, impossibly wrong. And it was hunting me. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. It had chosen me, for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom. And it wouldn't stop. Wouldn't rest. Not until it had what it wanted. I had to get out of here. Now. I broke camp in record time. Not caring about the disarray. Not caring where I was going. Only that I wasn't here. Only that I was running. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't running from it. I was running for my life. And something told me it was already too late. I left everything behind. Packing didn't matter. Organization didn't matter. Only moving mattered. I shoved everything into my pack, slung it over my shoulder, and forced myself forward. The hike back was a blur. A nightmarish slog through terrain that seemed to shift around me. The trees. They reached for me, branches clawing at my clothes, my hair, slowing me down. I pushed harder, lungs burning, muscles screaming, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Of being herded. Driven towards some unknown destination by something always just out of sight. I caught glimpses of it. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. A shadow that didn't quite match the play of light through the leaves. Always there. Always waiting. By midday, I was exhausted. My body trembled with the effort of putting one foot in front of the other. My shoulders ached under the weight of my pack. My throat was parched, dust dry. I knew I needed to stop. To rest. To catch my breath. But the thought of staying still for even a moment filled me with a sick, twisting dread. I kept going. Until my body made the choice for me. I tripped. A root caught my foot, my ankle twisting violently beneath me. I went down hard. Dirt and dead leaves scraped against my skin as I landed with a sharp cry, pain and frustration tangled together. For a long moment, I just lay there, chest heaving, gulping down air, trying to breathe through the pain, through the throbbing agony radiating up my leg. Finally, shakily, I pushed myself up into a sitting position, took stock of my surroundings. And that's when I saw them. They stood between the trees, motionless, watching. My breath hitched. At first, I thought they were statues. They stood too still, too unnatural. But the weight of their gaze pressed against my skin, like something tangible. Something wrong. They weren't human. Their forms were distorted, elongated. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, as if something had twisted them, reshaped them into grotesque imitations of life. I stared, transfixed. One moment, they were solid. The next, nothing more than wisps of shadow, flickering in and out of existence. Then, they moved. Silently. gliding through the underbrush without disturbing a single leaf. The silence was worse than any sound, more unnerving. Like the world had stopped breathing. I could see their faces now. Pale, gaunt, hollow eyes boring into me, through me, like they could see everything. Every secret, every fear. One of them, taller than the rest, lifted a hand. Its fingers, long, skeletal, unfurled like the petals of some grotesque flower. It pointed. Not at me. At the trees. Back the way I had come. A command. No words needed. Go back. Every instinct in my body rebelled. No. I wasn't going back. Not where that thing waited. Not into the heart of its hunting ground. I shook my head. A small, defiant gesture. I pushed myself up. Pain lanced through my ankle. I cried out, nearly collapsing again. The figures watched, impassive, unmoved. I forced myself to my feet. Hobbled forward. No plan. No destination. Only a way. Night fell swiftly. Too swiftly. The darkness closed in like a living thing. Thick. Oppressive. They moved around me. Silent. Unseen. I could feel them. Herding me. Driving me. A lamb to the slaughter. But I had no choice. I was too tired. Too hurt. Too lost to resist. I don't know how long I staggered through the dark. Time lost all meaning. A blur of pain and exhaustion. Then, a light. Faint. Distant. Barely more than a flicker. But there. A beacon. A lifeline. I forced myself forward. Ignoring the pain. Ignoring the way my lungs burned with every gasping breath. I moved toward the light. And prayed I wasn't walking into something worse. As I drew closer, the light resolved into the shape of a cabin. Its windows glowed with the warm, welcoming light of a fire. Small. Little more than a shack, really rough-hewn logs, a sagging roof, but to my desperate eyes, it was a palace. I half fell against the door, fumbling for the handle with numb, clumsy fingers. It opened with a creak of rusty hinges, and I all but tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against it, chest heaving. As if I could physically hold the horrors of the night at bay. The cabin was a single room. Spartan. Dusty. A small fireplace stood against one wall, its embers glowing faintly. A narrow cot was shoved into the corner. A lantern sat on a rough-hewn table, casting flickering light across the worn plank floor. It felt empty, like a place forgotten by time. I limped toward the cot and collapsed onto it, every muscle in my body screaming with relief. For a long moment, I just lay there, trembling, listening to the ragged wheeze of my own breathing. The silence of the cabin seeped into me, calming the hammering of my heart. The roaring of blood in my ears faded. I could no longer hear the rustling in the trees outside. Could no longer feel the weight of their unseen gazes. Had they lost interest? Had their job herding me here been done? Or were they just waiting, biding their time until I let my guard down? A shudder crawled through me. I pushed myself up on one elbow, wincing at the protest from my battered body. I had to keep moving. Had to find my way out of these woods, back to civilization. Back to the world of light and reason. But first, I needed rest. Just a few hours. Then I'd plan my escape. With that thought, I let my eyes drift closed. And surrendered to the waiting arms of oblivion. I awoke to sunlight. Golden streaks cut through the cabin's dust-streaked windows. For a moment, I just lay there, blinking against the brightness. Then, the memories came rushing back. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, snapping me upright. I swallowed hard. Had it all been a nightmare? Some fevered hallucination born of exhaustion and fear? But the pain in my ankle was real. The dull ache in my muscles was real. I swung my legs over the side of the cot, testing my weight. A sharp jab shot up my leg. I sucked in a breath, biting back a curse. My ankle held barely, but every step was going to be a battle. I hobbled to the window and peered outside, squinting against the brightness. The clearing was empty. The trees stood still, silent in the morning light. No sign of them. No trace of their passing except for the trampled undergrowth and the deep gouges in the earth where their feet had fallen. Relief warred with dread. Part of me wanted to believe they had never been real, that stress and exhaustion had conjured them from the shadows. But another part of me, the part that had felt their gazes, that had heard them moving in the dark, knew better. I turned away from the window, my eyes sweeping over the cabin's meager furnishings. A small stack of firewood sat beside the hearth. A few tin cans and a rusted kettle rested on a shelf above the table. And there, hanging on a peg by the door, a rucksack. Old, canvas. Its straps frayed and patched. A sudden, desperate idea took hold of me. If I could just make it back to the trail, back to where I'd started, I could find my way out. I could leave this nightmare behind. Never look back. I lurched forward, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my ankle, and snatched the bag off the peg. It was heavier than I expected. Something inside shifted, clunking dully. Curiosity, momentarily overriding urgency, made me append it onto the table. A scatter of items tumbled out. A rusted pocket knife. A frayed length of rope. A few scraps of what might have once been a map. And there, nestled among the debris, a journal. Its leather cover was cracked with age. The pages were yellowed, corners curling. Trembling, I flipped it open. Faded, spidery handwriting crawled across the pages. A record. A chronicle. Someone else had been trapped here. Hunted. The entries stretched back years. Each one more frantic. More desperate. They spoke of the figures in the trees. Of the creature that lurked between them. Of a slow, inexorable descent into madness. And then, I reached the final page. The writing was barely legible. The strokes shaky, scrawled with a trembling hand. But the words, they were clear, burned into the yellowed paper like a warning from the past. It's coming. Run. I snapped the journal shut. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. My pulse thundered in my ears. Outside, in the silence of the woods, something moved. I shoved the journal into my pocket along with the knife and rope, then slung the rucksack over my shoulder. I had to get out. Had to put as much distance as possible between myself and this place before night fell. Before the hunt began anew. I stumbled out of the cabin, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding after the gloom inside. I blinked, struggling to get my bearings, to remember which way I had come from. And then, I heard it. A sound I had heard before. A sound that had haunted my dreams and lurked at the edges of my waking mind. A low, guttural huffing, like the breathing of some great beast, punctuated by the snap and crack of breaking branches. It was coming. From the trees behind the cabin. Moving closer with every passing second. I could feel it. Its presence crushing the air from my lungs, pressing against my body like a weight I couldn't shake. And then, I ran. I ran like I had never run before. Fear and adrenaline flooded my veins, lending me a strength I didn't know I possessed. My ankle screamed with every step, pain slicing through me like a white-hot knife. But I ignored it. Pushed through it. Driven by the primal need to escape. To survive. The trees blurred past me, their branches whipping my face and arms, leaving stinging welts. Behind me, I could hear it. The thing that pursued me, its heavy tread shaking the earth. Its ragged breath echoing in my ears. I didn't look back. Didn't dare take my eyes off the path ahead. Because I knew, if I faltered, if I stumbled, it would be on me in an instant. Its jaws closing around my throat. Its claws tearing into my flesh. I ran. Until my lungs burned. Until my legs trembled. Until the world narrowed to the pounding of my heart and the ragged soar of my breath. And still, it followed. Never tiring. Never slowing. An inexorable force of nature that would not be denied. I burst out of the tree line. A clearing. Sunlight dazzled my vision, spots swimming in my eyes. For a moment, I was disoriented, blinking rapidly, trying to get my bearings. And then, I saw it. A structure. A tower. Rising from the center of the clearing like a jagged tooth. It was made of wood, weathered grey and shot through with rot. Its surface was pitted and scarred, as if it had stood for centuries. And at its base, a circle of bones. I stopped. Horror coiled in my gut. The bones were human. The remnants of countless victims, stretched out in a grisly tableau. Skulls grinned up at the sky, their empty sockets accusing. Ribs, femurs, spines, scattered like the discarded playthings of some monstrous child. And there, lounging atop the pile like a king on his throne, was the creature. It was even more horrifying in the light of day. Its form a twisted perversion of nature's design. Vaguely humanoid, elongated limbs, a hunched, misshapen back. But there was nothing human in its face. Nothing human in the way its too wide mouth split open, revealing row upon row of jagged teeth. It saw me. Its head snapped toward me, vertebrae cracking with a sickening sound. And then, it screamed. Half roar, half shriek. A sound that vibrated in my very bones. It unfolded itself from its perch, movements fluid, sinuous, belying its monstrous size. It began to stalk toward me. I backed away. My mind raced, searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. No path that didn't lead straight into the creature's waiting jaws. And then, movement. A flicker in the corner of my eye. I turned. And saw them. The figures. The same ones that had herded me through the forest. Their forms wavered, indistinct. They emerged from the shadows of the trees, moving toward the creature. Their steps jerky, unsteady, as if fighting against some unseen force. The creature whirled to face them, its body coiling like a spring, ready to strike. But the figures kept coming. Their numbers grew. Dozens. Then hundreds. A swarm. They surrounded the beast in a ring of swaying, twitching bodies. And then, as if responding to some unheard signal, they attacked. They threw themselves at the creature. Their hands clawed. Their teeth bit. Heedless of the wounds tearing through their own flesh. They clung to it, weighing it down, dragging it back toward the tower. The beast thrashed, roared, its monstrous strength shredding its attackers. But for every figure that fell, another took its place. An endless tide of bodies, driven by a single-minded determination. And slowly, inch by blood-soaked inch, they began to drag the creature back. Back toward the bone tower. Back toward the prison of its own making. Would I survive this? Would I even have the chance to run? I didn't know. But I had one last shot. And I was going to take it. I saw my chance. Saw the path that had opened up in the chaos of the fight. I ran, leaving the nightmare behind me, leaving the screams and the snarls and the wet, tearing sounds of rending flesh. I ran until the clearing was far behind me, until the only sound was the thud of my own footsteps and the rasp of my breath in my throat. And then, I ran some more. I ran until I burst out of the tree line, and onto a road, a blessed strip of asphalt, cutting through the wilderness. I stumbled forward, throwing up a desperate hand as the first car approached. A battered pickup truck with a startled-looking man behind the wheel. I must have looked a sight. Covered in blood and dirt, my eyes wide and haunted. But he didn't ask questions. He just drove me to the nearest town, and dropped me off at the sheriff's office. I told my story, or as much of it as I could. Without sounding like a madman, I spoke of getting lost in the woods, of being stalked by some animal, of stumbling upon an old cabin, and a pile of bones. I left out the figures, left out the creature, left out its malevolent intelligence. They searched the woods, of course, sent out teams of rangers and dogs to scour the area. They found the cabin, found the bone tower with its grisly adornments. But of the creature, of the figures that had fought it, there was no sign. I knew they wouldn't find anything, knew that whatever haunted those woods, whatever ancient evil had made its lair there, was gone, driven back into the shadows from whence it came. But I also knew it was still out there, waiting for its next victim, its next plaything to torment and destroy. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear it. A whisper on the wind. A ghostly echo of that bone-chilling howl. It calls to me. Mocking. Seductive. Urging me to return. To give myself over to the nightmare once again. But I won't. I can't. Because I know. If I do, if I let myself be drawn back into that heart of darkness, I will never escape. Never be free. My name is Mason Tallbear, and I am a survivor. But there are some things that leave scars on the soul. Scars that never truly heal. And the memory of that creature, of those figures in the trees, will haunt me until the day I die. But at least I can take comfort in one thing. I know I am not its only victim, not the only one to have looked into the face of true evil, and lived to tell the tale. Eli Blackwell, 2016. There are others out there, other survivors, other haunted souls, carrying the weight of unspeakable experiences. And maybe, just maybe, in the telling of our stories, in the sharing of our nightmares, we can find some measure of peace, some glimmer of hope in the darkness. Because in the end, that's all we have. The stories we tell, the memories we carry, they are the only weapons we have against the things that lurk in the shadows. The only light we can hold up against the encroaching dark. So I will tell my story, again, and again, to anyone who will listen. And I will hope that somewhere, somehow, it makes a difference. Because in a world full of monsters, sometimes the most powerful thing of all is simply to remember, to bear witness to the horrors that walk among us, and to never, ever forget. My name is Eli Blackwell. Back in 2016, I found myself in the middle of Glacier National Park, Montana, drawn to the place by my grandfather's tales. He was Blackfoot, and every year, he'd tell me about the silent ones, creatures that wandered the mountains when the snow melted. Things that came with the change of the season, hidden in plain sight. He'd laugh when he told the stories, but it was a laugh tinged with unease. A laugh that never quite reached his eyes, as if beneath the veneer of myth and legend, there lay a kernel of truth, a warning, passed down through generations. I brushed off the stories as I grew older, relegated them to the realm of childhood fancy, just another bit of folklore. No different from tales of Bigfoot or the Chupacabra, but something about them must have stuck with me, burrowed deep into my subconscious. Because why else would I have found myself drawn to Glacier, to the very mountains that had haunted my grandfather's tales? At first, the isolation was a welcome reprieve. No cell reception meant no emails, no social media notifications vying for my attention. Just me, the wilderness, and a tent that barely withstood the nightly mountain gales. I had chosen a campsite deep in the backcountry, miles from the well-trodden paths and tourist hotspots, nestled in a glade of towering cedars, with a glacial stream chattering merrily nearby. I could almost believe I was the last person on Earth. Almost. On the second night, as I sat by the fading embers of my campfire, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It stood out against the normal nighttime chorus. The chirping of crickets. The hooting of owls. At first, it was faint, barely distinguishable from the sighing of the wind through the trees. But as I strained my ears, it grew clearer. A soft, shuffling gait. The crunch of pine needles underfoot. The sound of something large, bipedal, moving through the undergrowth with a deliberate, almost methodical pace. My first thought was a bear. They were common in these parts, and while generally not aggressive, a startled or curious bear could still pose a danger. I stood slowly, reaching for the bear spray holstered at my hip, sweeping my flashlight beam in a wide arc, searching for the telltale glint of eyes in the dark. Nothing. But the sound. It continued, circling the perimeter of my small camp, always staying just beyond the reach of my light, just out of sight, in the impenetrable shadows of the trees. I called out, my voice thin and reedy to my own ears. A simple, "Hey there," the universal greeting of hikers and campers, a way to announce my presence, to warn off any wildlife that might be a bit too curious for comfort. The sound stopped. Silence descended. Thick, heavy, broken only by the thundering of my own heartbeat. And then, from the darkness, came a response. It was a laugh. Or at least, the closest approximation of a laugh that I've ever heard. From something that wasn't human. A low, rasping chuckle. Like the sound of dry leaves skittering across pavement. A sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Raised the hairs on the back of my neck. That was no bear. Bears don't laugh. In fact, I couldn't think of any animal that made a sound quite like that. It was almost mocking. As if whatever lurked out there in the dark was amused by my discomfort. Reveling in my growing unease. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, feeding it sticks and logs until it blazed high and bright. A beacon against the encroaching dark. And all the while, I could feel it. Out there, watching me, waiting. By morning, in the unforgiving light of the sun, it was easy to dismiss the events of the night. Easy to rationalize. The mind plays tricks. It conjures phantoms from shadows. Imbues them with sinister intent. I choked it up to nerves. To the unfamiliar noises of the wilderness. And went about my day. Hiking. Exploring the rugged terrain. But as night fell, so too did my bravado. The darkness brought with it a return of that feeling. That prickling sensation of being watched. Stalked. By something unseen. I found myself jumping at every snap of a twig. Every rustle of leaves. My hand straying. Unconsciously. To the hilt of my knife. And then, it appeared. Stepping out from the trees on the far side of the glade. Moving with a strange, shuffling gait. As if unused to walking. In the flickering light of my campfire, I could make out its form. Tall. Spindly. With elongated limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale. Almost translucent. Stretched tight over a frame that was little more than bone and sinew. And its face. I've tried, in the years since, to describe what I saw that night. To put into words the sheer wrongness of that visage. But there are no words. No frame of reference in the human experience. For the thing that stared back at me across the fire. Its features were a twisted parody of humanity. As if someone had taken a human face. And stretched it. Molded it like clay into something that was almost, but not quite, recognizable. Its eyes were sunk deep into pits. Black. Fathomless. Yet glinting with a malevolent intelligence. And its mouth. Its mouth was a gash. A jagged wound that split its face from ear to ear. Filled with needle-like teeth that glistened in the firelight. It took a step toward me. Its movements jerky and erratic. Like a marionette dancing on tangled strings. And then, another. And another. I scrambled backward. My hands scrabbling for my knife. For the bear spray. For anything that might serve as a weapon. But my fingers were numb. Clumsy with fear. And I could only watch. In mute horror. As it advanced. Closing the distance between us. With each shambling step. And then, it spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper. A dry rustling that seemed to emanate not from its mouth. But from the very air around it. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand. A guttural, choking tongue. That sounded like no speech of man. But I didn't need to understand the words. To grasp their meaning. There was hunger in that voice. A ravenous, insatiable hunger. That went beyond mere physical need. It was the hunger of the void. The abyss that gazes back. I ran. I abandoned my camp. My gear. Everything. I ran. Crashing through the underbrush. Heedless of the branches that whipped my face. The roots that tried to snare my feet. I ran. And I didn't look back. The watcher in the woods. I ran. Until my lungs burned. Until my legs gave out. Until I collapsed, sobbing and retching onto the forest floor. I don't know how long I lay there. Drifting in and out of consciousness. Minutes. Hours. Time lost all meaning in that endless nightmare wood. But eventually, I stirred, pulled myself to my feet on trembling legs, and staggered on, putting as much distance as I could between myself and the thing that had spoken with the voice of the void. I found my way back to civilization, eventually, back to the world of light, of noise, of human companionship, but I've never been able to shake the memory of that night, of the thing that walked in the skin of a man. I've done my research in the years since, pored over every scrap of folklore, every faded photograph, every yellowed newspaper clipping I could find, and I've learned that my grandfather's stories were far from unique. There are tales stretching back centuries, stories of creatures that haunt the wild places of the world, the Wendigo of the Algonquin, the Chenu of the Mi'kmaq, the Kushtaka of the Tlingit. Different names, different cultures, but always the same core story of something ancient and hungry, something that walks the line between man and beast, between the natural and the unnatural, something that hunts us. I've learned to live with the knowledge, with the weight of what I saw that night, but I'll never forget it, and I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, never stop wondering if one day I'll see it again. The silent one, the watcher in the woods, waiting for me. These stories, these accounts of the strange and the unnatural, they're more than just campfire tales, more than just urban legends, passed around to scare the credulous and the naive. They're a warning, a reminder, that for all our technology, all our supposed mastery over the natural world, we are not alone. There are things out there, ancient things, that have haunted the dark corners of the world since long before we crawled out of the primordial ooze. Things that have watched us, studied us, hungered for us, since the first of our ancestors dared to walk upright and grasp a tool. We've given them many names over the centuries. Gods, demons, monsters. But names have power, and these things, these beings, they defy such easy categorization. They exist in the liminal spaces, the borderlands between what we know and what we fear, what we understand and what we cannot comprehend. Some say they are a manifestation of nature's savagery, a reminder that for all our pretensions of civilization, we are still, at our core, just another animal, another link in the endless chain of predator and prey. Others claim they are something more, something other, visitors from realms beyond our own, beings that operate on a level beyond our understanding. But in the end, does it really matter what they are? Does it change the fundamental truth of their existence? The fact that they are out there, waiting, watching, always just beyond the edge of our perception. I've spent my life chasing these stories, these whispers in the dark, because once you've seen the abyss and felt it stare back, you can never look away. I've tracked them across continents, through jungles and deserts, across frozen tundras where the wind howls like a living thing. I've sat at the feet of shamans and witch doctors, listened to the tales of grizzled hunters and wide-eyed children, and everywhere I go, the stories are the same. Oh, the details vary, shaped by local culture, molded by tradition, but at their core, they all speak of the same thing. A presence in the wild places, a force that defies explanation, that laughs at our attempts to understand. Some have tried to rationalize these encounters, to explain them away as the product of isolation, of minds unhinged by solitude, by the uncanny quiet of the wilderness. Mass hysteria, folklore, the power of suggestion working on impressionable minds. And perhaps there is some truth to that. Perhaps the human mind, when confronted with the vast emptiness of the wild, when stripped of the comforting trappings of civilization, is prone to conjuring phantoms, to populating the darkness with the stuff of nightmares. But I've seen too much, heard too many stories, from too many disparate sources, to dismiss it all as mere delusion. There is a consistency to these accounts, a thread that runs through them all, binding them together into a tapestry of the strange and uncanny. And it's not just the stories. It's the evidence. The physical traces left behind. The footprints that shouldn't exist. The claw marks on trees and stone. The unearthly cries that echo through the night. Rising and falling in a cadence that is almost, but not quite, human. It's the disappearances, too. The hikers who venture off trail and are never seen again. The remote villages that simply vanish, leaving behind nothing but empty huts and unanswered questions. Oh, there are explanations, of course. Exposure, starvation, animal attacks. But those of us who know, who have seen the truth that lurks in the shadows, we know better. I've devoted my life to this pursuit, to the search for answers in a world that so often seems to defy explanation. And I've paid a price for that devotion. I've lost friends, lovers, family. I've sacrificed any semblance of a normal life, the simple joys and comforts that most take for granted. But I can't stop. I won't stop, because I know, with a certainty that goes beyond faith or belief, that these things are real, that they are out there, in the lonely places, the wild places, the places where the veil between worlds grows thin. And I know that someone must bear witness. Someone must keep the stories alive, to pass them on to the next generation, and the next, and the next. Because that is how we survive. That is how we arm ourselves against the darkness that dwells at the edges of our world. So I will keep searching. I will keep listening. I will keep telling these tales. Even if my voice grows hoarse, even if my eyes grow dim, because in the end, the stories are all we have. They are our light against the dark, our shield against the things that hunt and hunger, in the spaces between. And as long as there are those who remember, as long as there are those who believe, then perhaps, just perhaps, we have a chance to push back against the darkness, to hold the line against the things that would devour us all. For we are the storytellers, the keepers of the flame, and though the night is long, and the shadows deep, we will not falter, we will not fail, we will stand fast, and we will speak the truth, and we will give warning to all who will hear, for the watchers are out there, in the woods, and the wilds, and they are hungry.